Hey, Drew, you're not on mute. I wanna...
Yep. Well, we're going to get started. I just want to welcome everybody to our 2020 New York Trek, the virtual version. It's great to see many faces out there today, and very thankful that many of you could join us. Things look a little different this year, but nonetheless, we have and we are committed to being here and continuing the great experience that has been the New York Trek. So for those that don't know me, I'm Drew Reeder, part of the alumni team at GU, and get the distinct pleasure of working with our career and professional development unit as well, and get to go on a lot of these treks. It's been really fun over the years to see the Trek develop. I want to give a special welcome today to our 14 students who are our Trek students, and all of you looking very professional and sharp. Nice job showing up and getting that practice in. Also want to thank our faculty and academic partners who've joined us today and are going to be a part of the conversation. So, and also any alumni and friends that are going to be here. We'll have folks popping in and out throughout the day. So before we get started today, I wanted to just give a quick little bit of background and history on the New York Trek. It's just interesting as Gonzaga has grown, as our career operations have grown, as our alumni team has grown, to see the Trek and career preparation track along with that. So back in September 19th of 2007, we embarked upon the first New York Trek with a whopping 6 students coming over from little old Spokane to visit Manhattan. And that was our inaugural Trek. So that was 14 years ago. And just prior to that, about 5 years prior to that, was when the GAMP program, the Gonzaga Alumni Mentorship Program, started their efforts in Seattle and Portland, really with the attitude that if companies can't come to Gonzaga for our student recruitment, that we're going to take the students to them. And that was kind of the attitude from the get-go. But New York, from the very beginning, was a concerted effort that we really owe a lot of credit to our university leadership, specifically Kevin Mcquilkin, Thatcher Thompson, and Rich Schindler, who are all on the call today and we're going to hear from in just a few minutes. But they were instrumental, along with our New York chapter and other alumni, of putting together the New York Trek, which again, 14 years strong now, though virtual this year. It really, in its in the years of its history, is a transformational 2-day experience where students come over from Spokane and are able to visit some amazing companies, to go visit the New York Stock Exchange, see companies like Wells Fargo, Capital Group, Goldman Sachs, Blackstone, Piper Jaffray, Morgan Stanley, and a host of other Wall Street firms over the years. And much of that due to the fact that we have alumni who've been willing to open their doors in their boardrooms and have conversations with our students. It's become a kind of a history in its own, and our other treks that we do have a large amount of students. The New York Trek is usually only about 10 to 15 students. And so what you have after 14 years is a cadre of alumni, 100 some odd students who've come on this and have had this special transformational experience. The most exciting part, I think, for all of us is actually seeing New York Trek alums have that experience and contact and network with alumni in the area, and then land careers in Manhattan and work in finance. And then taking it one step further, seeing them hire students or alumni that come, and it comes full circle. And it's pretty phenomenal. But again, much of that is due to Three gentlemen are here with us today, kind of a Wall Street power trio, if you will. So I want to introduce them, and then we're going to have a time where we can just ask them some questions, and then the students will have a chance to introduce themselves and ask some questions as well. So we'll get started. First, I want to introduce Kevin Mcquilkin, who's the Managing Director of Mergers and Acquisitions with Wells Fargo Securities from the great class of 1983, and he is on our Board of Trustees. Welcome, Kevin. And then next I want to introduce Thatcher Thompson, who's a partner at the Capital Group from the great class of Gonzaga class of 1991. He's also on our Board of Trustees. Welcome, Thatcher. Good to see you. And last but not least, Rich Schindler, as part of our Board of Regents, is the founder and managing partner of Theatine Partners from the great Gonzaga class of 1989. And Rich has worked up and down Wall Street as well. So all three of these gentlemen, these zags, have amazing backgrounds in finance, and we'll get to hear a little bit about that today. So thanks for being here with us, gentlemen. And we're going to get started with just a question about the future of finance. So I want to kind of, and here's how this will go. We have a list of questions. You're welcome to answer any of them, all you can, or if you don't wish to, that's totally fine. And we'll just kind of, we'll roll with it. And if you have other thoughts from these questions, then go ahead and offer those thoughts as well. So first question is this: what does the future of finance look like, considering how the pandemic has changed office and team structures? You have a lot of people telecommuting and working from home now. So what does the future of finance look like for big companies on Wall Street? And if you can kind of speak to that from your point of view.
Well, you want me to start, Drew? You tell me.
Yeah, that sounds great, Kevin. Thank you.
Your question could come from a couple directions. One is the future of the industry itself, like not the working environment, but the business, and that will change. But the working environment is absolutely changing. There's no question about that. So where do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, why don't you, I think you could speak to both. Start with a working environment maybe, and then if you want to offer some thoughts on the other as well.
Well, the working environment for not just people in finance, students and everywhere else is something we've never had to deal with before. You know, we at Wells Fargo are not in our offices. And highly unlikely will be before middle of next year. I'd be very surprised. And that creates all kinds of obstacles, as you can imagine. It's not that complicated. Like going to school and a class on Zoom every day. It's an issue, and it's an issue lots of different ways. I mean, I frankly was hardly in the office anyway. So does it affect me not going to the office? No, I think it's fantastic because my commute sucked. So I'm glad I don't have to do it. But in my business, I travel a lot. I was probably on the road 3 to 4 days a week. And that's how you build relationships with clients. And that's really hard to do when you can't get on an airplane. So that's a significant change. But our clients are in the same boat. Even if we were allowed to get on a plane, the clients probably don't want us in their office anyway. So everybody's adapting to that. And the business aspects of our business are getting more normal. The biggest challenge with this remote environment for us is for the younger folks in our business. One, it's very hard to train people. I mean, the typical training, it's an apprenticeship business, so you learn it by doing it. And for somebody coming out of college, that means things like building models, building presentations. So the typical picture you see in the office is the new analyst sitting in a cubicle with 2 more experienced people sitting with them, looking over their shoulder, working through the model. That's damn near impossible to do in this kind of environment. So that's a challenge. That is definitely a challenge. The other big issue that we are spending an enormous amount of time on this at our firm, and I think everybody on Wall Street is doing this. You know, I live in the suburbs in Connecticut. I've got an office in my house that's always been here. It's been here for 100 years. I've got plenty of space. But if you're 22, 23 years old, just out of college, starting as an analyst on Wall Street, you are likely living in a 500 to 600 square foot apartment if you're lucky. And you're not just working from home, it's become living at work. And that has become a very, very big issue for our industry. I mean, I'm sure it affects a lot of people. It's just hard to get out. And the hours, we've talked about this historically on the truck, the hours in our business are pretty rough, especially for the analysts. Really tough duty. So we're coming up with all kinds of solutions, none of which are perfect, but dealing with mental health challenges. It's concerning. It's very concerning to people. And hopefully that'll stop in the next 6 months. But right now it's a fundamental difference and a real challenge.
Very good. Rich or Thatcher, any comments to round out Kevin's?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add to what Kevin was saying. I agree with everything Kevin said. What I would add on the side of how the industry is evolving, and just using myself as an illustration, is if you think of the history of the industrialization of corporate America, over 2+ centuries, it's been a process of agglomerating and then decomposing into and then away from large organizations. And so there's been a trend towards initially centralizing resources within companies, and then a later trend of decentralizing them. And I think Wall Street has probably been, or financial services broadly, has probably been a little later to the trend of sort of atomizing resources and having people, work in sort of a piecework way as they had, centuries ago. I think, the tech industry, for example, was way ahead of the curve in terms of having people work from home, because working in technology, you have users and employees who embrace technology and use it to effectively disaggregate, the value chain in that sector. I think financial services is now moving in that direction, not by choice, by virtue of the pandemic, but I think having learned that the challenges Kevin was noting notwithstanding, but having learned that people can work from home, that having shiny glass and steel office towers in Midtown Manhattan or downtown Seattle or downtown San Francisco aren't necessarily critical to getting work done. Companies have recognized that the bottom line can be enhanced by effectively embracing the necessity of working from home. And in my experience, and sort of tying it together with where I started, I mean, after an almost 3-decade career on Wall Street, I decided to start my own company earlier this year. And it's been quite a journey in the sense that I left Piper Jaffray at the beginning of this year, and I had an industry mandated non-compete period, or what we call garden leave, where I couldn't work. And when I left Piper, I didn't know the pandemic was coming. And so my thought was that when I was able to launch my company, that I would take office space and start interviewing young people like yourselves, and hire an office manager and do all the normal things that one does in starting a company. And then COVID hit, and I realized, okay, well, everyone from Goldman Sachs and Bank of America on down to very small companies who are working from home, I will do that as well. And it has caused me to sort of revisit and rethink what it takes for me to provide the services that I provide to my clients. And it doesn't require that same degree of physical infrastructure that I had assumed would be necessary. And so I think of it as a bit of an evolution. I think we're all learning this in real time. There are challenges, as Kevin noted, but I'm not sure that financial services or any industry will be returning to the pre-COVID normal. I think it's causing a real rethink on a number of fronts.
Very good. Thatcher.
Yeah, well, I think Kevin hit the bad parts of it well. Let me focus on the good parts. I'm getting 8 hours of sleep a night for the first time in my career. I've lost my commute. I'm become way more efficient in taking meetings. I do them online, but I think they're a little less effective than they were in person. I think our organization's working pretty well online, but I worry about the young people. I'm kind of working off of relationships that were established over 2 and 3 decades, and they're trying to build relationships and build relationships with each other, get to know each other's personalities. That's hard to do online. And but you know, the last month I packed up and I've been traveling around the country, just staying in different places and working from different locations that I never thought I'd visit, and it's been great. I think Kevin raises a really good point. From the time COVID hit until about August, you know, people just weren't taking any vacation. They were working all the time. They'd get up, they'd check their computer, they'd work all day, they'd check right after dinner. It was just constant. And we're trying to get people to take a Friday off, you know, because at some point it becomes kind of unhealthy and people get burned out. That's it.
That's good. Just keeping these thoughts in mind in terms of kind of less infrastructure, being maybe location independent, where you can work from anywhere, as that kind of morphs. Can the three of you look at what the most important financial jobs will be in the future? So is that going to change from your classic structure of starting as an analyst, or are there other types of positions, you know, students coming out of college who are going to be more valuable in different types of financial positions or with different expertise? Is that structure changing as well?
I'm not sure the biggest scale in terms of jobs is really the analyst, associate kind of roles, the junior roles. Some of the most active recruiting certainly in our business right now is for compliance people, which is not a good statement, but it's just the nature of the world we live in, unfortunately. But that's not really an undergrad or even an MBA. That's more of a legal role. I don't know, Drew. I mean, I'm not sure it has anything to do so much with the distance aspects of it, of being able to be remote. I think that will be an aspect of every business, frankly, not just finance. But there is a need for, you know, the accounting functions, obviously. I saw Andrew on there. He's doing a thumbs up probably. The finance functions for sure will always function. They change. The job that I started in 30 some years ago is very different if you started today. The industry is different, but the basic stuff isn't really all that different. You're doing analysis. We solve clients' problems. When you sort through all of it, all of what we do, whether you're Rich or me, and different, you know, to Thatcher to a different degree, different process, but it's the same exercise. You know, you got to solve the client's problems, and sometimes that's a financial solution. Sometimes it's a strategic outcome. Many times it's something as simple as doing a better job with investor relations and selling the stock and convincing Thatcher he should buy your stock. That's not necessarily a banker's job, a finance job, but it's a company's job, and we help them do that. That's not going to change. I don't think that's going to change.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I would add to Kevin's remarks that I think, having nothing to do with COVID, I think there's been a longer wave trend in financial services towards offshoring and the commoditization of certain products and services that financial services companies provide. And so I think people like Kevin and Thatcher and I, you know, have, in the span of our careers, we've migrated to what I think are the remaining sort of value-added positions, perhaps in contrast to, you know, low-cost capital or back or middle office functions, which have either been mechanized or offshored. The one thing that I do think about specifically related to COVID that may change the role of the junior person is, you know, and Kevin and Thatcher will smile when I say this, but, you know, you always say that the bad stuff rolls downhill, and any junior level analyst or associate person, you know, will start off, he or she will do a fair amount of PowerPoint work and sort of basic grunt level research and analytics. And I think just the growing comfort with working on Zoom, with sharing things on Slack or via email, and working in models contemporaneously, I think may accelerate that comfort level with offshoring. So for example, many big financial firms, Piper was leaning towards this, and Kevin, I suspect, and Thatcher, Capital Group and Wells Fargo, I'm sure do this to some degree, but a good amount of work that is offshored, basic presentation or analytical work that is offshored, particularly to India, but points around the globe that are lower cost service providers. And I do wonder if this sort of growing fluency among senior managers with, oh, hey, this isn't just for young people working, doing Zooms and working in Slack. This is, I got the hang of this. Why don't we do more of this and save more money? Like, I wonder if it will jumpstart, a trend in that direction, which again, I think will maybe change the nature of a junior person's role a bit, doing less of that work and having to demonstrate perhaps more quickly that they can add value in those higher value-added functions.
Over the course of our careers, Kevin and Rich chime in, but there have been some big changes in the jobs. There's lots of different jobs in this industry, but for example, in my industry, the mutual fund industry when I entered was largely an actively managed business with people actually knowing the companies and building models and trying to figure out what to buy. And passive, that tracks just an index, the S&P 500 or the Russell or the, what have you, has really taken a lot of share. And you don't need a lot of people to do that. That's why they're very low cost funds. They don't know the companies they're investing in. They're just buying the things that are in the index. So I think overall active management has struggled and probably has fewer people. It used to be that the big banks put their own capital at risk, both equities and fixed income. And there's some rules that have kind of changed how they can do that. And there's just less of it. Am I still registering here? I'm having some computer problems. Can you hear me?
You're good. You froze for a minute, but
yeah, you're good now.
Okay. And so those are a couple of big areas. But I think, as Kevin said, there's always going to be a role for people who solve problems. And that's your biggest job, is to find a job, learn as much as you can, solve the problems for your employer, and just keep looking for new problems. And so I think there's always going to be room for smart young people who figure out how to help their organization do things better.
Awesome. Thank you, Thatcher. I want to talk very quickly about your companies. And Rich, obviously you're starting one or will be very in the process of it. But talking specifically about what's going on in your companies as it pertains to recruiting and hiring. Have you scaled back? Are things frozen? Because we've got, students and alums who are still interested in getting into finance and most specifically our trekkers. So what's going on specifically in hiring or recruiting in your companies?
Well, Rich is going to build an empire.
Rich is building an empire.
As we speak.
So Wells Fargo, like most firms on the street, we have the very standard process. The recruiting process, frankly, is very bureaucratic. And the normal course is you come in, hopefully as an analyst, a summer intern. One of the things that we talked about change in our industry, it used to be the case that bigger firms would hire, summer interns and then take the ones they like and offer them jobs to come back full-time the next year. And then in general, we would look for about half of our full-time class would be going back to campuses and hiring more people. For undergrads, it would be your junior year as an intern and then come back as a senior. That's changed radically. Now, most firms will hire a full class of summer interns, hopefully like them, because as you can imagine, it's a 10-week job interview, and fill their full-time classes for the following year out of that summer intern class, meaning that the opportunities for people who weren't interns are pretty limited. That is a significant change that's happened in the last 5 to 10 years. It means that to get in the door early on, you need to be earlier than you used to have to be. The opportunity to interview as a senior is close to gone in the mainline Wall Street firms. I don't think that's going to change. We're moderating a little bit, but specifically in this environment, it's a real challenge. I mean, if you think through the dynamics for any business to plan ahead, we would be hiring in the, let's see, the spring and fall of your sophomore or junior year for summer interns for the following summer, who would then go back to school and come back full-time a year later. So to some degree, you're projecting it looks like we might lose some power here. Oh, that'll be interesting. We're having a storm on the East Coast. So if I blink off, it's not you. Essentially, we're trying to project our needs for the entry-level people 2 full years ahead of time. And that's really hard to do in any environment, let alone the one we're in now. So what I think it's doing this year, Drew, is making us more conservative. We're going to take fewer people and hope we need more. What you don't want to do is be the firm, and there was a lot of debate around the summer interns this year, because nobody had in-person internships. It was all just like this for your whole summer job. What nobody wants to be is the firm that hires too many people and then decides they don't need them and then cuts early. First year analyst gets fired. That's just not a good sign. And the impact of that carries on for a long time with new classes of students. So people are and were and are going to be conservative in hiring, at least this year.
Okay.
Drew, I'd sort of pick up on that with a sort of a different perspective, given that I just launched my new business and I have one employee who you're looking at on the screen. But my experience these last several months, I think, is instructive of where the broader market may be going, and it dovetails with what Kevin was saying about larger organizations being more conservative. But I am working on projects now where, because I'm in the nascent stage of building a company, and because we're in this peculiar environment where everyone's working from home, when I have to present teams to prospective clients and existing clients, what I've been doing is effectively working with other people who are either independent or maybe between opportunities or have the flexibility to work as a 1099, and I'm pulling teams together sort of virtually, much as we're doing generally in business life right now. And I think that may become a bigger trend. It goes back to what I was saying before about the disaggregation of the value chain. That is facilitated by technology. And I think the conservatism of larger organizations, the justifiable conservatism of larger organizations will accelerate that trend. So I think the future of what that means for this group is the future of opportunities in financial services may look different, or there may be a broader array or a wider range of types of opportunities. For young people starting out, it won't necessarily just be go into a big training class at a big bank, but there may be more bespoke opportunities available with smaller companies and niche players that spring up in the wake of this, changing environment.
Thank you, Rich. Thatcher, are you back on?
I don't see him.
Okay, he's probably still trying to connect. So given the realities that you two have kind of spoken of in terms of where hiring and recruiting is at right now, and given that Gonzaga is not on the top 10 target school list for Wall Street and big firms, what would you suggest the best way for our students to apply for some of these entry-level positions with less hiring going on? How can they kind of break through? What's the tactic that you could suggest for those listening today?
The tactics are the same as they've been. Coming from Spokane, it is, the economic reality of analysts in New York is that there's thousands of applications for every position. And if you think about the hiring as a business opportunity, we don't have to spend a lot of money to go find people. Where we spend money is selecting and competing for the best people. We don't have to go find them. So we don't have to go to Spokane, Washington and interview people. Just don't need to, because the marginal difference between the best analyst from Spokane and the best analyst from Princeton is not dramatic in terms of the economics of it. So you just don't spend money. That said, we're open to people coming to us. So what that means for you all is you got to make it happen on your own. And you do that by networking with people like us. You do that through the alumni network. I'll give you a couple examples. I do this this is the Trek speech. There was a young guy many years ago now who worked, sent letters to Warren Buffett when he was at Gonzaga, and Buffett responded, which interesting, he does. It's fairly common. And as this guy graduated, he said, "I'd love to come and work somewhere in your companies." And he got a job as a reinsurance analyst in Omaha, Nebraska. And after doing that for 6 months, decided that just was not a good idea. Being 22 years old in Omaha, Nebraska, in the insurance business. So he decided he wanted to go to New York and try to be a banker. He showed up in my email one day. I was working at JP Morgan at the time. And I said, "Let's talk." So we got on the phone and he told me his story. And I said, "Well, first, how did you find my email? How did you get directly to me?" And he told a story about, found my name on some alumni list, but then he started just using every different combination of J period, P period, JP Morgan dot whatever, and Kevin dot Mcquilkin, Kevin Mcquilkin without the dot with my middle initial, until one worked. I said, "Wow, that's ingenious and clever. You could have just called the alumni office and they would have given it to you." But the point is that he made a huge effort. He came to New York, he networked, he found a friend of a friend, let him have a room in his apartment. He found another guy who introduced him to somebody who gave him access to the NYU recruiting database. He just hustled, is the bottom line. But you have to, the message is you have to do it. You got to make it happen. There's a couple young guys in our business now, James Taff, who I think is hopefully going to join us later. And what's his friend's name? I always forget his name, Ray.
Brian McFall.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I should write that down before we have these sessions because I always forget his name. So Brian left Gonzaga, went back to Seattle, wanted to try New York, had a job in Seattle, but he said, "I'm going to make this happen." So he took a shot. He said, he'll tell you he sent out 5 applications online. He got 5 responses. He got 1 interview. And he got a job as an analyst in a very small little firm. A year later, that firm, one of their analysts left. They only had 2, 1 left. They asked Brian if he knew anybody, and Brian called his friend James from Gonzaga, and that's how James got into our business. Now, both of them have subsequently moved on, but the point is they got in the door. That's the first step. Once you're in the door, then it's up to you that you can make it work, but you're discovered at that point. The recruiters all find you. It's not that hard in New York. But the first step is tough, really tough. And you got to make it happen yourself through networking, through just outright hustle. And at the end of the day, sometimes you got to get lucky too. You just got to get lucky. The other alternative to get into business is coming in as an MBA, as an associate, which is a higher level title and job. And it's more of a career track than it is. The analyst track tends to be more of a 2 or 3 year exercise. Some of those people stay and continue on as a career, but not everybody does. The base deal is you do 2 or 3 years. And then many people go on to do lots of different things. Go to work in private equity, go to hedge funds, go to we had somebody decide I'm going to go to the Peace Corps, went and did that. So it's a stepping stone to do other things.
Kevin, in terms of the MBA, I just want to touch on that really quickly. Probably not all MBAs are created equal. So if a student was considering that, would you suggest going that route, or only if they can secure a spot at, a certain school? I don't know what the equality is there, but is it worth it right out of school getting the MBA, say at Gonzaga, or a school that maybe wouldn't get recognized, or does that still have hold some weight for hiring decision?
I'd love my partner's opinions, and I have strong opinions on this, and we talk about this as a Trek every year. It depends on what you want to do, Drew, and it depends a lot on where you want to be, where you want to live. There are 5 to 10, probably 10, graduate business schools who's have the brand that travels anywhere in the world. Harvard, obviously, being Stanford, Kellogg at Northwestern, Chicago, Wharton, and a few more. They have the brand that you can go there and do and kind of take it wherever you want to go. There are other MBAs. University of Washington has a very good program. But if you're a business in Atlanta and you're interviewing somebody from the University of Washington Business School, you have no context. That brand does not travel that well. So if you know where you want to go and live, that opens up a lot more opportunities in terms of good educations and good programs. And that's something to think about. The other aspect of, you mentioned go right away. Most of the top schools, in fact, I'm sure all of them these days, require applicants to have full-time work experience. When I applied to grad schools when I was still a senior. I got in a couple, but I got into 3, the top 3 that I wanted to go to, and all of them wanted me. They said, you're in, but you're in the class 2 years from now. Go get a real job, work. And I was kind of burned out on school anyway, so it made sense. But the purpose of that is that the education you get in these top grad schools is not from the professor standing in front of a room talking to you. It is the professor's job is to organize and lead a discussion, but the discussion takes place with your classmates. So if you have in your class somebody who spent 2 years on Wall Street, 2 years as an engineer at Boeing, somebody else 2 years selling soap at Procter & Gamble, you've all got different experiences and business issues and situations that you can all draw from. Because I think the MBA program is largely a proxy for a lot of experience. And you get that from talking to your classmates, not necessarily from a professor. And that's why the work experience is an important, critical piece of what they require in getting in. When I was at Northwestern, I was on the admissions committee, so the students would actually have votes on who the next class is going to be, the input into your classmates. And there was one person I'll never forget who was she was working as a vet's assistant at a slaughterhouse in Wyoming. So that was different. She also happened to have a dual major degree in biology and psychology from Stanford in 3 years. So she has serious horsepower, but she was different. And the view of the admissions process was this person's going to bring something to the class that nobody else is going to have. And that made a huge difference. The flip side of that is if your Northwestern had a program at the time, they still do, where if you had an undergraduate business degree within the last 5 years, you could come in the summer and join the second year class. So you basically skipped the first year. Now, the requirements for that class were so narrow that, I don't know how many applications I saw that said I went to the University of Illinois, 4.0 in accounting, worked at Arthur Andersen, passed the CPA exam on my first time. Well, you don't need 50 of those in a class. You only need a couple. So where I'm getting to is, if you're going to go that path, you got to think about that first job as, how does that help me get into a good MBA program, if you want to do that? Less about it as the long-term career. What is it that's going to shine on my application to make me different, to make me, what are the business schools like? Rich, they want leadership. You got to be successful. They want leadership, because they're the business school's customer. We've had this discussion in our board at Gonzaga. I'm rambling a bit, but this is a point that I think is interesting. When I was at Northwestern, the dean said, who's our customer? And the message was, the customer were the employers, not the students. The customer was the employers. And therefore, we need to build a product that they're going to buy. And a big part of buying that product is the admissions process really stretched to get the right kind of people that would fit the customer. I like to think that our customers at Gonzaga are not the parents, not the students. Our customers are the employers. They're the employers, the grad schools, the volunteer corps. That's who our customer is. And you guys are the product. And that's why we do stuff like this, to improve the product, hopefully.
Great, thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
Rich and then Thatcher to follow. Just again, what we're talking about is how do Zags kind of break into Wall Street? Just that process. Both of you, or all three of you, have your unique story, but just from your perspective, what are the things that it takes, skills and otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, the young man that Kevin was talking about, who the 105 that led to 5 interviews, one job. I mean, that's a pretty good example of the ratio of what, or hit rate, that one should expect on a sort of self-directed job search process. And so I think so much of it is rooted in, this is probably self-evident, in initiative and resourcefulness. And, I think back to when Kevin and Thatcher and I were getting out of school, the resources that we lacked relative to your class with respect to the internet and just all the different layers of information that are available to you or at a one step remove. And I think as a result, it really gives you the ability to design a search, and so much of it is around, again, effort and initiative and being resourceful and going on the attack. I mean, it is unlike a more structured job search process sitting, at I think we used the Princeton example before, where there may be, Wall Street firms coming on campus, and it feels a bit more passive and more highly structured. This is a process that you structure yourself. But with that, even though that takes more work and the hit rate, as I just said, may be lower, it also allows you to design that search in a way, whether it's geography or function or subsector within the industry, where you can really find little niches and interesting areas that may be of greater appeal and aren't of sufficient size or scope to go out and do their own recruiting, but you through reverse inquiry, find those yourself. So I think, I would really encourage, to me, and we're all wired differently. Some people like more structure, some people are more comfortable navigating ambiguity. But for those of you who are more desirous of embracing, risk and comfortable with some degree of ambiguity, I think with a little sort of reflection, I think you can really come to appreciate the benefits of a self-designed job search.
Thatcher, thoughts?
Well, quickly, Capital Group hires both people from MBA programs, generally among the 10 or top programs that Kevin alluded to. And we also hire straight out of undergrad, and typically not business majors, you know, engineering, biology, come in, learn the business for a couple of years, do a rotation. In fact, the person who kind of leads Capital Group right now came in on that program. I just say a few things. Maybe I'll describe my own journey and a couple of other Gonzaga grads. You know, I was an accounting major. Actually, I was an English major, and I ended up playing basketball at noon with an accounting professor, Eddie Beerer, who retired not too long ago, and he convinced me to take his class. And I thought, well, maybe if I had an accounting degree, I could find a job better than I could with an English degree. And went into accounting, and I absolutely hated it. And worked with a very smart woman who went to the University of Washington, who told me, hey, let me introduce you to this guy at Dame Bosworth, which was a brokerage firm. I think you'd really enjoy it. I had a lunch with him. I knew nothing about investing, and that one thing led to another. And part of it was luck. Part of it was hard work once I got there. And the next job offer came from New York from a guy I sat next to on an airplane flying from Denver to Portland. And I was reading a prospectus, and he asked me what I was doing. And I told him, no, I didn't want to move to New York. I love Seattle. But then my wife matched in New York, and I had to move there. So I called him a year later and got a job. And it was kind of a series of lucky breaks, but sometimes you make your own luck. And I also had a rejection party. I took all my rejection letters coming out of Gonzaga. I had them taped up in our living room on Augusta Street where I lived, and invited everyone over, and we had a keg of beer, and everyone brought their rejection letters, and we kind of laughed at it and had fun with it, and said, boy, what idiots those people are for rejecting us. And you know what? Kind of made us all feel better. We were in recession when I graduated. You know, so I got lucky, but I also took advantage of every opportunity I got and learned a lot. You know, we had one of these meetings, I don't know when it was, maybe 10 years ago, Drew.
Yeah.
It was a bunch of students who were sitting in our office in New York, and I said to everyone, you know, I want to know who you are, where you're from, what you're studying, and I want a stock idea. And some of them had them, some of them didn't, but there was one guy named Jimmy Barber who had like 5.
Yeah.
And he just kept bringing them up, and and it was fun to talk to him about them. And he had kind of this different way of thinking about things. And Jimmy ended up, I think, working at Wellington and then moving out to LA. And I've had dinner with him a couple of times. He just recently moved to San Francisco. He's in the investment business, and
Yeah.
we haven't had a chance to get together, but he made an early impression on me as someone who just was hungry to be an investor. And I have to say, I was a research director for 6 years at Capital, which meant I hired and interviewed hundreds of people for jobs. Most of them fancy MBAs. I don't have an MBA, so I'm kind of biased against MBAs, but that's where we hire. And I would look at these resumes, and I would think, and I'm sure Kevin and Rich have done the same thing. You're like, wow, this is like the most accomplished person I've ever met. I can't believe their interests and what they've done. And geez, I had done diddly squat at their age. And then you meet them, and you're like, that is the most boring person. I couldn't imagine myself working with them. There is nothing interesting about them. Don't be intimidated by other schools. Be yourself and bring your own unique personality, because that's what I'm looking for when I hire. I want someone who's really different, who brings something, just a different perspective to how we think about things. And I think we've actually been pretty good at that over the years.
Very good. Thank you, Thatcher. I want, if you could, 2-part question for all 3 of you to kind of round out our time. We have about 10 more minutes. Just talking about maybe a highlight of yours from your career so far. And then also, like, why does it matter that we're Jesuit? And because I think it does, but speak to that for our students, and that is definitely an asset for them coming in and looking and competing for jobs. So 2 parts, career highlight, and why does it matter to be Jesuit?
Okay. I really appreciate the second one, Drew, because that's an important one. And it really goes back to what we were just talking about the job search and how to get hired. I will definitely highlight in my career. I guess the fact that I'm still doing it. I mean, there's a lot of stories in our business. You know, you get, I've been asked many times, what's your favorite deal? And the answer to that tends to be, once I've gotten older and I've thought about it, the answer to that is the ones I've done with friends. You know, if you get to, after some point, your clients are just clients in many cases. There's a business relationship, and sometimes you develop friendships, a real off the hours kind of friendships. And those are the best deals. You're working with people you want to work with. I also think one of the best accomplishments I would point to is we talked earlier, this is a tough business. It takes a lot of commitment, a lot of hours, and the commitment becomes in context of prioritizing. There are many times when the business and the clients have to be a priority. And when you've got a family, that can be really hard. It's a challenging personal lifestyle choice. So in terms of accomplishments, I've got one wife, still married. That doesn't happen a lot in our business. We've got 4 kids, all of them reasonably articulate and successful. 2 of them are Zags. And that's, I think, as I get older, that becomes a real accomplishment to me. It's less about the deals. The other part I'm proud of is I've trained an awful lot of really good, smart young people who have gone on. Some are bankers, some aren't. There's one guy that worked for me for 20 years, is now 45 and was until very recently a CEO of a pretty large public company, very successful. And he will tell you I trained him. Well, you know, he started with a hell of a lot of brain power, so it wasn't that I created it. The Jesuit piece, though, I think is critical. And it's how it gets back to how do you differentiate yourself, whether you're applying to business schools. We talked about differentiating, but in a job interview, you know, if you think about the core curriculum, the Jesuit background, the training, it's all about problem solving. We talked about earlier, Thatcher mentioned it, I mentioned it, Rich mentioned it. If you think about problem solving, the key to almost any business situation, almost any life situation, is identify the problem, develop a solution, and then more important than anything, you have to be able to articulate it. You have to sell it, verbally and in writing. You could create the greatest app in the history of the galaxy, and if you can't sell it to somebody, it's not worth anything. So what I just described, I think, is critical thinking. And that's what the Jesuits have been developing in all of you for however long you've been there. We don't know that yet. I don't know who's in what year anymore. But I mean, it goes on. When I talk to seniors, that's been going on for 4 years and you don't really know it. It's kind of seeping into the water maybe. And you don't think about that until a few years later. I know I didn't. I didn't realize that that was training that I was getting while I was there until a number of years later. You know, people today ask me, what are the most important classes you had? What do you use more in your job? And everybody expects me to say accounting and finance. And the answer is always the philosophy classes. That's what taught me, one, how to think critically, how to write in many cases. And one professor I had many times, you had to be able to communicate and debate your positions. Those are the things that I use more than anything. But that Jesuit component about the critical thinking, Drew, you guys can sell that, because a kid from Wazoo or UW doesn't have that, just doesn't have it. And it works, but you have to find a way to use it, but it can be very effective.
Thank you, Kevin. Rich, you want to jump in?
Yeah, Kevin stole my thunder a bit on the critical thinking. So thanks for that, Kevin. I couldn't agree more. I'll pick up on the Jesuit point, which is, and just to illustrate what Kevin was saying, I was a finance major at GU and loved it and had a great experience in the business school, but I had two minors that were in the college in economics and in political science, and then I ended up, as Kevin did, going on to get my MBA at Wharton, where I studied finance again. And one of my regrets in life, it's not a big regret, but I wish I had majored in a liberal arts degree undergrad, because when I look back, much as Kevin was saying, on my experience at GU, where I learned how to think and how to sift information and ferret out what was important and piece that together and draw logical conclusions. It was in classes like philosophy and political science and theology and history. And when I think back to the courses that I really enjoy that stick out in my mind, it were those classes. And it wasn't because the business classes weren't great themselves and useful, but I think it was really that sort of Jesuit infused, the humanistic approach to education that really sort of shone through and has benefited me throughout my entire career. And as Kevin was saying, you can have the greatest idea, but if you can't express it logically and forcefully and effectively, then it won't come to anything. In terms of, I had more time than Kevin did to think about what the deal or what I am proudest of in my career, and having more time didn't help me. Where I tend to go is early in my career when I was at Blackstone. I advised Enron during their bankruptcy, and it was an amazing experience, and I felt like I was living in history. It was a page A1 in the Wall Street Journal business story for months and years on end. It entered popular culture through a number of movies about this gigantic, hundreds of $billion fraud. And I was there with all the players, and here I am in my early 30s at the time, and it was an amazing experience. But when I'm more honest with myself, and my focus is in advising companies that are in financial distress or difficulty of some kind, probably my favorite story, and the one that I always come back to, is I negotiated a restructuring that saved 2,000 jobs for a women's apparel retailer called Lohman's over the course of a weekend during a period of time. And for a long period of time, I was a single dad. And so I had my then 6-year-old daughter all weekend. I had the flu, and so I was running a fever of about 102, and I was glued to my phone from Friday night until Monday morning, negotiating with lenders, with bondholders, working with the company's counsel, working with all the parties to the transaction to effectively put this company on a sound financial footing so that these jobs would be saved. And it's not often in business where you really feel like you're able to not just do well, but do good. And that's one of the things that's always drawn me to restructuring. And I'll never forget, somehow I'd organized a play date for my daughter in the middle of all this. And her little friend comes over with her parents, and I open the door, and I've got a phone glued to my ear. I'm absolutely ghost-like in my complexion. And this little girl's parents look at me and say, Rich, are you all right? And I just nodded my head. I said, yeah, everything's good. Sorry, I'm on this call. And that stuff stays with you. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
That's awesome. Thank you, Rich. Thatcher?
My son is a freshman at Gonzaga, and when he started one of his classes, I think it's an honors class, and I'd forget which one, but they said, go find a neighborhood and hang out there for 3 hours on a weekend and just soak it in and write up what you observe. And he told me he had to do this assignment. He's like, this is the goofiest thing in the world. And I kind of agreed. That sounds a little strange. But he went and did it. And he's like, God, I picked this really cool neighborhood, Peaceful Valley, which is down on the river down below downtown Spokane. And the next weekend, he took 4 of his buddies there, and they hung out and they got coffee, and there's a baseball diamond down there, and they kind of goofed off in the rain and then went and had lunch, and they all loved it. And, when when I think of Gonzaga, it's those kind of strange things that happen that create that unique community that I think is just different than most higher ed schools. That just isn't likely to happen in a lot of different schools. I agree with Kevin. I consider myself a very good writer because of going through Gonzaga, and it is the skill that I use far more than my finance skills. I think anybody can out-finance me. I can explain things better than most of them. What am I most proud of in my career? I have a lot of successful investments that I'm proud of. And mostly I'm proud of them because I feel like I saw something the rest of the world didn't see. We bought a lot of it and I ended up right. There are many where I saw something that didn't happen too and I was wrong. But the thing I'm most proud about, truthfully, is my time at Merrill Lynch in the 90s when everything was going public and there was a frenzy and bankers were bringing crazy ideas, and I was kind of the voice of reason and said no to many of them, and was actually, it was a stressful time. I thought I was going to get fired, but I was supported by a research director, and my view was, if I don't like it, I'm not going to recommend it to our investors. And just because there's a fee there doesn't mean we should do it. And that's actually was the hardest thing as a young analyst that I had to do, but I'm so glad that I did it, and it kind of shaped how I think about things. So that's what I would say. Kevin will remember those years in 98, 99, early 2000.
We were doing drive-by deals. I mean, literally over weekends, and things just didn't make sense, but they just got done.
That's awesome. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Yeah, there's a couple stocks I wish I would have bought in 98 and 99, but that was a long time ago. We're going to get a chance to hear from our students now. So what we're going to do is they're going to do their introductions, and then they'll have a chance to direct specific questions that they've prepared to whatever panelists they prefer. So Aaron, I'm trying to figure out the best way to do this. You may know the student list better than me, and some of them are on a call and not on the screen. Do you want to just call them out, Aaron, and then we can just do it that way?
Yeah, I will do that.
Great.
Let's start with Gabby.
Hello, my name is Gabby Flake. I am a senior here at Gonzaga studying business administration with concentrations in finance and operations and minors in entrepreneurial leadership and Spanish. And I am so honored to be here, and thank you for the opportunity of being able to hear you and meet you all.
Where are you from?
I'm from Everett, Washington.
Thank you.
And Hannah, how about you?
Hi, my name's Hannah Ackerman. I'm a sophomore here at GU studying accounting with a concentration in finance. I'm from Covington, Washington. I'm also on the Gonzaga women's rowing team, and I am also so honored to be here today and be able to learn from you all about investment banking.
Great. Joe, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Joe Corner. I'm originally from Salem, Oregon, and I recently graduated this last May, summa cum laude from Gonzaga with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science. I'm now pursuing my MBA with a concentration in finance, and I'm playing my final season on the men's soccer team here. So I guess kind of the reason I'm here is, my original plan was to go to law school, and then I redirected and decided I wanted to pursue something in finance. And so I figured while I still have eligibility on the soccer team, I'll at least learn through the MBA program here. It was interesting to hear a lot of your takes on things. I'm currently going through process trying to find summer analyst internships for next summer. I'm a little bit late in the recruiting process, but in terms, Kevin spoke to the hustle, and I'm certainly going through that right now. So that's all I got. Again, thanks for being here. I appreciate everything you guys have said so far.
Kyra.
Hi, my name's Kira Piper. I'm from Seattle, Washington. I'm a sophomore at Gonzaga University, majoring in business administration. And I really appreciate you all taking the time to be here and talk to us today.
Thomas.
Hey everybody, I recently graduated from Gonzaga in May with an engineering degree and a business minor. I wanted to come on the New York trek because I started as a mechanical engineering major and then realized that I didn't like it that much and I liked the business side more. Thank you so much. I'm trying to learn the most that I can in a short time, and thank you very much for having me.
Okay, Melanie.
Hello, I'm a political science major with a minor in business administration, analytical finance, and women and gender studies. I loved hearing your take with finance and just your view on having a liberal arts education. That was very empowering, especially as a social science major. So thank you.
Nicole.
Hello, my name is Nicole Gagnon. I'm a junior here at Gonzaga University. I'm studying accounting and finance right now. I'm originally from Orange County, California, and I'm just really thankful for you guys to be here and this opportunity to speak with all of you and get a really good insight into the financial world.
Janice.
Hi everyone, I'm Janice and I'm currently a junior at Gonzaga studying finance and marketing. I'm originally from Woodinville, Washington, and here on Gonzaga, I'm a part of the business fraternity, aka Psi, so I've been able to develop somewhat level of professionalism, and I am really looking forward to networking, and I was able to attend the Seattle trek, so this is why I was super excited to be in person with you guys. Unfortunately, that wasn't able to happen, but I look forward to this opportunity and networking with you guys, and I just wanted to thank you in advance for helping me build my network.
Chris.
Hey, I'm Jeanine. I'm an accounting major in finance, minor in political science. I'm also on men's soccer here with Joe, and I'm from Madison, Wisconsin. I guess my goal would be get my foot in the door with some type of summer finance internship and then get a job and then hopefully go back to school and get my MBA. Thank you.
Okay, Michael.
Hello, my name is Michael Calmet. I came to Gonzaga in 2016. At the time, I did not know what I wanted to do with my life, so I decided to study physics and added a minor in computer science. And when I turned 21, my grandparents gave over a beneficiary brokerage account. And so I had all this money with essentially no direction of what to do with it. And the first thing I did was buy Macy's stock because Charles Schwab gave it an A rating. And I lost $100 in 2 days. And I realized I really needed to learn more about it. So I started getting into the fundamental and technical analysis of researching stocks. I became intrigued by the way that the economy and current events affect the stock prices. And so when coronavirus hit in March, I decided to come back and do my MBA in finance. So thank you again for being here. I know it's a busy time, especially with the election next week, earnings, some big earnings today, and COVID cases spiking. So thank you again.
And Kevin.
Hi everyone, my name is Kevin Moore. I am originally from Los Angeles, California, and I am in my senior year and currently majoring in business administration with emphasis in finance. And I'm very thankful to be here right now and to be able to learn more about the finance world, what offers are out there, and to be able to network with you guys.
Awesome. Did we get everybody, Aaron?
Yes, that's everyone.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do is you're going to use the little reaction emojis down there. Use the hand one. And the first hand I see up, we'll call on you and we'll just kind of go, we'll kind of be back and forth. So everybody has a question they want to ask, just do that. Call on you and we'll call on everybody who raises their hand virtually, electronically. Okay, Joe gave a thumbs up. There you go, Joe.
Yeah, so I actually had a question. It's kind of more directed to Kevin because I know he works in M&A at Wells Fargo. But we kind of spoke to, how business is changing in terms of the working environment. But I'm actually interested in sort of how your business has changed so far in coronavirus with the actual deal flow and business being M&A fairly cyclical, follows the business cycle fairly well. What's your deal flow like now this year point compared to last year?
Well, it's very consistent that when there are significant market disruptions, and we had one of those in March for sure, M&A to some degree stops. Always going to be a little bit, but the fundamental reason for that is when you don't know what the future looks like. Half of the S&P 500 withdrew earnings guidance. Companies don't know what their earnings look like, and in many cases still don't. But when you don't have a good view of the future, it's impossible to put a good value on something, whether you're buying or selling. It's just hard to do. So people stop. They pull back. A lot of deals were in process that stopped and didn't happen, and they're coming back out now. Companies are going to be sellers, and they're starting to reinvigorate these processes. So it's been a horrible year for M&A, without question. It's certainly coming back, and coming back quickly, which is the other thing that's pretty consistent. When Thatcher can talk about growth expectations from investors, but if you go back to the financial crisis a dozen years ago, the only thing investors cared about in the middle of it was liquidity and balance sheet security. They didn't talk about growth. It's just like, make sure you're not going to die. We had the same thing this spring. Soon as investors decide the world's not about to explode, they immediately turn to where's the growth. And the fastest way for people to grow is to buy it. 20 years ago, there was perspective. I'd love to hear what Thatcher thinks about this, but we've never talked about it. But there was a perspective that organic growth was better than acquisition-driven growth. It was different, and therefore better and maybe valued more highly. I don't think that's the case anymore. What matters is how you're growing, and are you doing it smartly? But the fastest way to do it is inorganically. We'll buy things. And we're in an environment where capital is ridiculously available, incredible amounts of liquidity, and interest rates are close to zero. So capital is available and cheap. You need to grow, so you go buy it. And it's coming back already. We're seeing it. And the data is actually a little deceiving when you look at aggregate data, because there have been some really, really big deals in technology and healthcare defined broadly. That kind of distorts the business. I spent all my life with industrial companies, and there has not been a lot going on in industrial land because we're really impacted by COVID globally.
Thank you.
Next question.
Yeah, I guess I'll follow up with that. Kevin, you're talking about there not being that many mergers and acquisitions over the past year. Recently, though, it seems like there's been a lot of M&As with oil companies, with the WTI crashing and companies that had bad balance sheets. Some of these bigger companies like Pioneer, Exxon, and Chevron have been acquiring these companies. So I guess two questions is, first, do you see that continuing? And second, do you see that demand coming back in the future? And with underdevelopment and kind of the push for clean energy, do you see there being kind of some kinks with supply that will boost up the WTI in 3 to 5 years, where it becomes way more expensive and these companies might actually be profitable?
There's a lot of questions buried in there. There have been a number of energy deals lately. We've been involved in a few of them. I mean, the energy industry is a dumpster fire. I mean, it's a disaster. And it's self-inflicted, like a lot of corporate wounds. It's very self-inflicted, but it's also, you know, it's an industry where you've got geopolitical dynamics that don't really exist in most other industries that have impacts. You've got the environmental movement for sure, and COVID, right? People just aren't going anywhere. Airplanes aren't flying. The demand is way off. So will the demand come back? Yes, I think so. That's my view. The question becomes one of supply discipline, which the industry has proven completely incapable of doing for years. It's a tough business. Capital hogs, right? So capital's available and cheap, but they spend an enormous amount of it. And where the government regulation goes, I don't know. You tell me who's going to win next week, and I can give you a reasonable idea where it's going to go. But I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Right, other questions? Joe.
I ask another one. Kevin, how do you guys, in your firm and in industrial specifically, how do you guys weight valuation techniques? Like where do you place a greater emphasis on certain styles of valuation, or is it sort of a all-encompassing look at from a broad perspective and with incorporations of each style?
What we really do is try to interpret what the investors are using, right? So if Thatcher as the investor prefers, you know, for a certain industry prefers a cash flow multiple or something else, that's what we should be using, because that's how you determine value. Value is not what some model says it is. Value is not what the DCF says it is. Its value is what a willing buyer and seller are going to transact at. That's what value is. And that differs. But in the context of things like, you know, a fairness opinion is something that bankers do. Public companies going to sell themselves. They want to get a fairness opinion, which is essentially a banker sprinkling holy water on it, saying it's a fair price. That's essentially all it is. And it's really just an insurance policy. So when shareholders sue them, they got somebody that will stand behind them and say, the expert said this is okay to do. In that context, you look at all the different types of, you know, multiples, DCF, you look at multiples, prior transactions, all that stuff. But even across different industries, those vary. We just talked about an oil and gas transaction. You're going to use techniques in there, or certainly analytical multiples, that are very different, that don't have any application to other industries and have certain weaknesses and positives. But it's about collecting a range of data and then determining through judgment what makes sense. So it's maybe not a crystal clear answer, but you use all of them. But for the most part, you got to decide what the investor is using.
That makes sense. Come up with the answer that they want in some ways.
Well, it's what they're, if my job is to help a client create more value in his or her company, right? The objective of the banker, no matter what you're doing, is to make your client's company worth more. In order to do that, I've got to figure out what the market values. How do they value growth over, you know, is this company penalized because it's not growing as fast? Is it penalized because its balance sheet has too much leverage on it, therefore they don't have as much flexibility? Is it because their margins are weak relative to others? Is that a management issue? Is it a technology issue? What is it? What are the things that create that matter to investors? And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what I think. What matters is what somebody like Thatcher thinks. That's what matters. Or if it's a private company, the buyer of a private company, that's what matters.
Question from Melanie, and then Kira had a question after Melanie.
Right, so I have a two-part question. So there are not that many women and people of color within finance industry. Do you see that changing in the industry and firms prioritizing diversity in their recruitment? And then my second question is, do you wish you had tried a different finance field than your current career path?
Go ahead, Thatcher.
I know it's changing at our company. We are actively looking for diversity, and that comes in many different forms. But you know, and very specifically in our investment group, 20% of the professionals are women. That's too low. We recognize that. Now, we know that to get to 50% women, we can't do it overnight. That involves firing a bunch of men who are also very good people. But as they age out and retire at the margin, I think we've hired more women than men. And if we're going to rebalance it, that's what we have to do. And I mean, some incredible investors among our women. In fact, our very best investors have been women, at least over the last decade. Same goes for minorities, underrepresented in our industry, underrepresented in our company. We need to change that. So we're working on it. In terms of a different career path within finance, I don't think so. I feel really lucky to have the career that I've had at the company I work with. I love what I do, and I wouldn't change it.
Rich has a very diverse workforce.
I was going to say we are 100% white male here, but that's a temporary condition. I will say in all seriousness, so my last position at Piper before I left earlier this year, I ran a 10-person group, and I think we had 2 white males among our 10 group members. So we had a very diverse team. I think we were half and half male and female, and quite a number of people of color, which was a real focus for me and a focus for the firm, I think, to the firm's credit. And I agree with what Thatcher is saying. I mean, I think it is a focus, I think now more than ever. I think it's something where maybe when Kevin and Thatcher and I were starting in financial services, it was something, diversity specifically was something that lip service was paid to. But, you know, actions speak louder than words. And I think, you know, we are now starting to see action, and all you have to do, and again, we're all working from home, so I'm watching a lot more television than I typically would have previously, but all you have to do is turn on CNBC, and they are making a concerted effort to talk to Wall Street leadership about what are you planning to do to diversify your workforce. And these aren't CEOs and other business leaders on the defensive. These are people who have plans, who've been giving this real thought and are starting to implement, and it's long overdue, but it is nice to see. As for doing something different, I fell into restructuring and distressed about 22 years ago now, and it was kismet. I am very fortunate to have found this peculiar little niche in investment banking and financial services that I love, and I can't imagine doing anything different in my career.
So Rich hit on a little bit the question of gender and ethnic diversity has been a point of debate on Wall Street for as long as I can remember. Everybody says it's important. We do all kinds of things to try to address it, and without question have failed miserably. The issue is why. Why hasn't it worked? And my narrow view is I stood up we had this discussion at a senior management meeting about probably 5 years ago, and little table sessions about the data says we are significantly underrepresented in all these groups. And so why is it? So I stood up at the end in front of this, call it 100 people, and said, so my question is, how many people in this room, and these are pretty senior people, how many people in this room have on their annual review and their compensation discussion a direct link to this issue? Not a single person raised their hand. I think, you know, human beings are coin-operated machines. And I think if it's important to a firm or an industry to say this really matters to us, you got to pay people that deliver. And that is something, at least at Wells Fargo, very specifically has changed in the last 12 months. The senior leadership is getting compensated in part based on these goals. That will change behavior. Unambiguously will change behavior. But it's a real challenge in banking. It always has been. But nobody's ever broken the code. I struggle to say why. I don't know why.
Do we have time, Aaron, for one more? Kira
I believe Gabby had a question.
and Gabby too. Well, I know Kira was right after Melanie, so maybe two more and then we'll call it.
Okay. If that works for a panel.
Yeah.
Okay. Kira, then Gabby.
Okay. Hi. I just have a question for Mr. Schindler. We have talked about how Gonzaga's Jesuit values have influenced you personally, but I was wondering if these values have also influenced the mission of the Untitled Partners, or how you decided to build your company.
So it's a funny story, and I'll keep it brief since we don't have a lot of time, but the original impulse for naming the firm, it's Theatine Partners. The Theatines are an order of the Catholic Church that were known for, they were formed during the Reformation when the church was maybe at one of its lower ebbs. And the idea behind the Theatines was effectively to raise the church's game a bit in combating the challenge that it faced from offshoot denominations and other challenges to the church's authority in the moral sphere. And I thought, what a great inspiration for a firm like mine focused on rehabilitating financially distressed companies. So if you think about the Reformation, and specifically the Counter-Reformation, which was the Catholic Church's initiative to reform itself in the face of external challenge, I thought, what a great mission behind behind a new firm that is focused on renewal and rehabilitation and rejuvenation. That's a great story, and it was one that I researched as I was deciding to name the firm. The actual awareness that I had of the Theatine Order is my favorite book since I was much younger than you all, is the book Candide by Voltaire, which has been made into a Broadway musical and a fairly well-known book from the Enlightenment age. And there is a Theatine monk who's my favorite character in the book, and I thought, probably about when I was in my teens, not much younger than you, I thought, if I ever that's a cool sounding name. If I ever have my own firm, I'll probably name it that. And so I was able to at least back into a good rationale for naming the firm Theatine. But in all seriousness, I think certainly my experience at GU and my fluency in Jesuit values and what I took away from GU, and I think a lot of that is echoed in the in the founding of the Theatine Order, continue to be an inspiration for me. And that's why I mentioned the story that I did, or what I was proudest of with respect to reorganize, or helping Lohmann's reorganize and restructure. I mean, so much of my work and all of our work, Thatcher and Kevin and I and all of us who work in financial services, it can feel like a task, or coldly analytical but not human. And I think without some degree of humanity in your work, I think it starts to lose meaning. And so much of my academic career at Gonzaga, I think about this quest for meaning, and through literature and philosophy and theology. And so by finding things in our work, that connect meaning with tangible outcomes, I mean, nothing is more fulfilling, and so much of that is grounded in Jesuit and Theatine philosophy.
Thank you, Rich. And Gabby, for our last question, I believe.
Yes, thank you so much. I also have a question, Mr. Schindler. I read your article about the age of the unknown unknowns, and I was looking at all of those questions that you posed in there that organizations should reconsider, and I was wondering what your perspective was with the recent third quarter economic performance that came out recently. What do you think is the most pressing unknown that organizations should be paying attention to right now?
Well, thank you. I'm glad to know that somebody reads the things that I write because I'm never quite sure.
So she's the one that read it.
I mean, other than my editor, I've never really said. You know, Gabby, it's a great question. I'm not sure what the in light of third quarter economic performance or in light of just what's going on in the world more generally, I'm not sure what the greatest unknown is and what the greatest unforeseeable risk that investors and fiduciaries ought to be thinking about. The reason I wrote the article was really to create a bit of a dialogue and a call to arms, if you will, among decision makers, again, whether they're managers or board members or investors like Thatcher or advisors like Kevin and I, to be thinking about things that are outside of the box. I mean, there was a book written several years ago by Nassim Taleb, The Black Swan, about things that you're not pricing into valuing companies, or you're not incorporating into your probability weighting as you assess potential outcomes in any business or economic circumstance, and the risk of an unforeseen circumstance having a cataclysmic result. And so for me, it was to identify things that people take for granted that perhaps ought to be revisited in some way, as not beyond the pale, but possible, and to plan for them as best as investors and fiduciary decision makers can. And I was really picking up on the pandemic and COVID as something that was not truly an unknown, because we've had other viral diseases of similar type like H1N1 and SARS and Ebola, but you didn't have thinking at the corporate level around, well, what will happen if you have a pandemic that results in this degree of economic dislocation and shutdown, and how do we plan for that? And so the idea behind the article is really to ask the questions, not to necessarily think that the answers would be easily discoverable, but to start the mental creative juices flowing so that people can think about how to be resilient in the face of emerging unknowns.
Awesome. Well, we have to conclude this part of our virtual New York trek. I want to give a special thanks to Kevin and Rich and Thatcher for your time, not only today, but for the decade plus that you've given to the New York trek, and also to the leadership of our university. It's very much appreciated. So thank you for that and the wisdom that you're able to impart today. I wanted to remind everybody that we have a few more things coming up today. So starting at 2:10, we've got Kenny Bukhari, over 3 decades at the New York Stock Exchange. He's always a very exciting person to listen to, tell some great stories. He's currently the managing partner at Case Capital Advisors and also a CNBC market analyst. And then at 4:10, we've got a networking social with some of the members of our New York chapter, and they're still going strong. It's a tough time for New York right now, but just so blessed to have alumni that show up, and hopefully students. You got a little picture of that today. So again, thank you to our panelists. Hope to see you all. It's this very same link that we're on right now, so you can either screen off or log back in, whatever works for you, but I hope to see you again on these other segments. Stay connected, and go Zags. Thank you very much. See everybody soon.
Thank you for all of you.
But what was interesting is that the fever would come at night like it typically does. It would be fine all day, and then it would be 6 o'clock at night, and all of a sudden my fever would go up, and then it would break in the middle of the night. When you have a fever and it breaks and the bed is soaking wet because every night for 5 nights that happened. I had to get up and change the sheets because then the bed gets cold, when it's after you sweat and then it's all wet and the bed gets cold. Oh my God. So, but that was that. And then I get better. So I was okay. But, and I got the antibodies. So I go, every every month and a half or so and donate my antibodies because they say it helps. So, okay, here you go. And that's it. But you know, it's so funny because I lost about 10 pounds during it and I gained 20 back.
All right, everyone's here, so I think we're going to get started.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this segment of the New York City Trek. So the first year that I went on this trek was my first year at Gonzaga in 2015, and we were on the subway heading to take pictures at the Raging Bull and to visit the stock exchange. And a group of students started a conversation with somebody on the train, and I thought I was going to need to talk to them about talking to strangers on trains. I maybe should have done that, but they said, hey, this guy was really cool. He told us he works at the stock exchange and to swing by his desk while we were there. And we ended up doing that. And that person was Kenny Bukhari. And off the cuff, he provided us with what I would call the most amazing lecture on the history of the stock exchange that I have ever experienced. So much so that every year that we've gone back since, Kenny has been a part of the trek and has been really the part for me that makes it a huge success in helping people really understand the history of this thing we call the New York Stock Exchange. So we've invited him to be with you here today and to do some of that presentation. What he is going to do when he starts speaking is just kind of go on with his, what I'm going to call the lecture. And then when he is done, we'll have the Q&A after that. So Kenny Bukhari is the managing partner at Case Capital. He's been on the New York Stock Exchange for 30 years and is a frequent speaker on a variety of media sources. As a matter of fact, when he's done here today, he'll be talking to an Australian media source to talk about the stock market. He's often seen on CNBC. And the thing that I am kind of sad about today is that you don't get to meet him in person. He's definitely a big personality, and he's originally from Boston, if you can't tell it by his accent. And, hopefully we'll get to see you again next year, Kenny, but these are the Gonzaga University students, and thank you so much for your time today.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure. So where are they? Are they up there yet? I can't see them. Oh, there they are. Hey, how are you? Welcome to this virtual class, and I, for one, am sorry that you don't get to see it live and in action at the New York Stock Exchange, because it is really an amazing place, and I'm going to tell you a story, and we're going to have a conversation today about what it is, why it's so important, how it transitioned itself from what was to what is today, why and how, and then what happens there today. And I'm happy at the end to take some certainly some questions. So write them down as you go along, because I'm sure there'll be plenty of them. But let me just start by this and tell you that I was 19 years old. I was a freshman in college when I had the opportunity to go and spend a summer in New York. And like you just heard, I'm a kid from Boston. I'm not a New Yorker. I was brought up in a town outside of Boston. I spent my summers on Cape Cod, and when I had this opportunity to go to work on the New York Stock Exchange in the summer of 1980, I thought to myself, why the heck would I want to do that when I had every intention of going back to Cape Cod and being a lifeguard on the beach? It didn't make any sense to me. I didn't know what New York was. I had never been to New York City. I'd never been to the New York Stock Exchange. I didn't know a stock from a bond, a buy from a sell, or an eighth from a quarter. And so I went back my spring semester, my freshman year, and I thought about it. And I kept thinking about, the opportunity and what's the worst that could possibly happen, And so there's two answers to that. One is you go there, you have the experience, doesn't really work, you chalk it up for experience, you put it on your resume and you move along. Or I'm going to go there and it's going to completely change the course of my life. And I will tell you, if you haven't figured it out by now, it changed the course of my life. Because at first, when I was going to school in Washington, D.C. And, you know, in Washington, D.C., you typically go to school because you want to become a politician or a lawyer or a lobbyist. And, you know, I had dreams of being president of the United States. And thank God I am not the president of the United States. But one way or the other, I had this opportunity in the summer of 1980. And once I did that, I walked through the doors of the New York Stock Exchange in May. It was about May 15th. I was all of 19 years old. I had no idea what I was walking myself into. And I found the most amazing place in the world. And if any of you have ever been there, and I can't tell if anyone has ever been there, but if you see it on TV, what it used to be is exactly that. 5,500 type A personalities running around, screaming and yelling, bidding and offering, managing order flow. And order flow in the New York Stock Exchange is institutional order flow, right? So when we talk about institutionals, you're talking about mutual funds, hedge funds, pension plans, foundations, institutions that manage money on behalf of individuals, right? Versus you as a retail investor, you know, you want to buy 100 shares of telephone and put it in your retirement account. That order is not coming to me at the New York Stock Exchange. But if you're a portfolio manager at, you know, Carlson Capital, which is a hedge fund down in Dallas, Texas, and you need to buy 1 million shares of GE, that order's coming to me, or it would come to a broker on the floor. And so that's the kind of business it was. And when I first walked on the floor, remember, they spoke in a different language, right? They spoke in fractions, they spoke in symbols. The way you represented yourself as a buyer was one way. The way you represented yourself as a seller was a different way. And you had to know the language. It's like anything. It's like being picked up and, you know, you go study abroad in Italy or Germany or China, wherever you go, you have to learn that language before you can really communicate. And so I spent the first summer learning the language, asking a lot of questions, being a gopher, writing up reports, delivering reports, but asking. And I was there probably 3 or 4 weeks. It was probably the end of June, and I just got bit right on the backside. And I was like, oh my God, I cannot believe where I am, what I'm witnessing, what I feel. It's like, think about this. You know, when you go to a concert and you're close to the stage, and those big massive speakers that are on the stage, and when they start playing the music, how the music blasts through the speakers, and if you're standing close enough, it goes right through your body and you can feel the vibration going through your body. Think about that for a minute, because that's what it was like every single day that you went to the New York Stock Exchange. And if the market was up, it was one sense of a blast. If the market was under pressure, it was a different sense of a blast. Yet it was that constant blast that kept you going. And when you talk about 5,500 type A personalities in the room, you can only imagine where the energy level was every day, because it was here. It was here no matter if the market was up or down. It was just a different energy. And you could feel it. You could tell what the stocks were doing. You could tell what the market was doing by listening to the noise and feeling the energy in the room. When I tell you, it was the most amazing place in the world. And so I went back. I went back to school in September of 1980, and I transferred. I was at American University. I wanted to go to Georgetown, but Georgetown didn't want me out of high school. I think they took my application and threw it in the trash. But I went to American, and I thought I'd do really well, and then I transferred to Georgetown. But after that experience on the New York Stock Exchange, I was like, oh my God, I don't want to do anything in Washington, because I was no longer going to be a politician or a lawyer and all that. So I transferred back to Boston University and went to the School of Management and started studying business. And I had the opportunity to go back in the summer of 1981 for the same broker that I had worked for in the summer of 1980. And then I went back to college in September of 81. And now we're into the summer of 1982. So here's the deal. And here's what you need to understand. So let me just paint this picture for you, because we as a nation had just come through the late 70s and the Iranian hostage crisis and the oil embargo, and Jimmy Carter had been the president. Ronald Reagan was now president. The U.S. economy was a disaster. Inflation was running at 10%. Unemployment was running at 13%. And interest rates were on their way to 21%. Think about that just for 1 second. 21%. You could put your money in the bank and earn 21% guaranteed riskless sleep at night. And today, rates are 0.5%, and they're talking about raising them by 0.25% at some point, and everyone's having a nervous breakdown. And so you have to understand, kind of, let me just understand where we were as a country and where we were economically and where we were in terms of the economy and really the world, right? And so as I went back in the summer of 1982, Ronald Reagan, they were in the midst of passing the Reagan Tax Reform, which was a massive tax reform package, much like what Trump did in the first year or two of his presidency. It was a massive tax reform package that happened in this country. Paul Volcker was Fed chair at the time. And, but the economy was in a tough place. Interest rates were 21%. I told you unemployment was running at 10%, at 13%. Inflation was running at 10%. It was a disaster. Guys were losing their jobs. Guys that were my age were getting thrown out the same way that we saw during the great financial crisis. And kids getting out of college were finding it difficult to find a job. And so I went back in the summer of 1982 to that same broker that I had been working for, assuming that, it's all good. And he never told me otherwise. And I got all the way back to New York. I move into this apartment. I come to work the next day. And this guy, puts his arm around me and he said to me, listen, he said, I can't afford to have you. Now, let me put that in perspective, because afford to have me meant I was an intern. I was making $125 a week. So maybe I was making, $500 a month, right? Even that amount, this broker who had spent his life on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange was just an additional expense that he couldn't absorb. He didn't want to, made no difference. His business was down and I was one of the casualties. And so I thought, wow, I said, okay, well, maybe this is the summer I go back to Boston and go be a lifeguard on the beach in Cape Cod. And so before I did that, I walked around because now I had gotten to know a lot of guys on the floor, different brokers and all that stuff. And so I said, let me walk around and just take the temperature a little bit and have a conversation and see what's out there. And so I walked around and I walked to the other side of the floor and this broker who I'd gotten to know, who is the salt of the earth. I love this man. He's now retired. He lives out in Orient Point on the tip of Long Island. He's now 80 years old. But when I tell you, I love this man. He is the salt of the earth. And so when he saw me, he puts his arm around me, because you have to understand the personalities. It was all about the personalities. It's what the personalities of the people is what gave the institution its life. And so this guy puts his arm around me and hey, it's nice to see you. Welcome back, blah, blah, blah. Like he all excited to see me. And I looked at him and I said, Mr. Latham, I said, I came really to say goodbye. I said, because I'm not coming back this summer because Doug can't afford to have me. And he goes, what do you mean Doug can't afford to have you? I said, well, he's not doing very well. And it's just an expense he can't afford. So he looks at me and he said, hey kid, do you know the difference between a buy and a sell? I go, yes, sir. He goes, do you know the symbol for IBM? I go, yes, sir. He goes, do you know the difference between an eighth and a quarter? I go, yes, sir. He goes, it's $250 a week. Okay. I go, what? I just got a raise. Are you kidding me? $250 a week. I hit the lottery. I go, when do you want me to start? I'll start right now. And so I did. And so in fact, I started the very next day with this guy, and that experience is where my life really began to change. It was the most unbelievable. This guy, separate from the other broker, had a different kind of a business mix. So his business was actually flourishing while the other broker's business was not. He did a different business. His customers were different. He was doing this second broker was doing business out of Chicago and what was becoming the option trade-off business, because options all of a sudden became this vehicle in the investment industry that every time guys who traded options, they needed to offset it with a corresponding stock trade. And so the lines that the opportunity to create new business by talking directly to brokers in Chicago that were connected to the New York Stock Exchange. So every time they did an options trade, they needed to offset it with a stock trade. So this guy's business was flourishing because options were just exploding. And so I joined that firm. I joined him for that summer. But here's the deal. Still understand this. The economy was lousy. Interest rates were still 21%. Inflation was still running at 10%. Unemployment was still running at 13%. Nothing really changed. And think about this for a minute. If you were anybody who had any money at all at that time, and you had a choice, you could take your money and you could go to the bank and you could give it to the banker and he's going to put it in a CD and you're going to earn what? You're going to earn 21% on your money, guaranteed, sleep at night, no risk. Or you could take that money and you can buy American Telephone and General Electric and ExxonMobil, all fine American companies, blue chip Americana companies. They're fine companies. But what do they have? They are full of risk, right? There's no guarantee that stock prices are going to go up. There's no guarantee that dividends aren't going to get cut. There's no guarantee that their businesses are going to grow year over year consistently. And so if you were anyone who had any money, you put your money in the bank. Think about it. Just take $100,000 and multiply it by 21% year over year guaranteed sleep at night. Just think about it. It's a simple calculation. And so after the Reagan Tax Reform package and after, Reagan and the economic team decided that they were going to break the back of inflation. They were going to break the back of unemployment. And how do you do that? So you do that by slashing interest rates, right? And you slash interest rates, which then causes what? Causes money to come out of the banks and go into what? Hello? Stocks. And so here was the best part. The best part was it was August 17th, 1982. And I'll never forget this. It's in my head right now like it was yesterday. And so it was a Tuesday. And what happened was on the Monday, there was a rumor going around that the Fed was going to come out on Tuesday morning at 8:30 and make the surprise announcement. Let me explain something. The Fed never made surprise announcements. The Fed came out at 8:30 on Thursday mornings. They'd open the door. They'd come out to the podium. They'd make an announcement about what they were doing with rates. They'd pick up their notebook. They'd turn around. They'd close the door, and that's it. They'd walk away. It was up to the market to figure out what that meant. The Fed did not sit there and hold your hand and say, "Come lie down. Let's take a Xanax. Let's talk about this. Are you okay?" No. None of that happened, right? They just came out, they made their announcement, and then they walked away, and the market had to figure it out. And so when the rumor started on Monday, and the rumor circulated through the telephones, remember, there's no such thing as the internet. There's no such thing as Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. There's none of that. And there was no technology on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Now, first of all, technology didn't even exist in 1982, right? In the way it exists today. And so therefore, the way the news traveled around the world was through the telephone. And so since we were on the floor of the exchange and there were no outside news sources there, so there was no television on the floor of the exchange. There was no radio. You couldn't have a radio. There was no outside news. The only way we got news was when somebody from the outside called down and said, "Hey, this just happened or that just happened." And there was a method to that. And there was a reason for that. Because when you were on the floor of the exchange, you weren't supposed to be poisoned with noise from the outside world. When you had an order to walk into a crowd, if I had 100,000 IBM to buy, I needed to go into that crowd and I needed to represent it based on what supply and demand was at that moment in that stock. I didn't need to be poisoned with hearing what was happening in the outside world. And so there was a method to that madness. Anyway, we all laughed on the Monday afternoon as the word spread that this rumor about the Fed coming out, because the Fed never did it. So Tuesday morning we come to work, and the market didn't open until 9:30. People used to start to come together on the floor 7:30, 7:45, 8 o'clock. I used to get there early at 7 o'clock in the morning. I used to do the work. I used to do the organization work from the night before and get my day ready and get myself set up and read the paper and have a coffee and blah, blah, blah. And so as 8:30 approached, you could feel the room kind of get quiet. Didn't get really quiet, but it just kind of got quiet because everyone's waiting for this supposed announcement. And when the announcement came, we wouldn't even know it came until the phone started to ring. So it was about 8:30 and 30 seconds. And every single phone on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange lit up. Now understand something. They weren't cell phones, and they weren't these fancy new phones that play music. They were these old industrial steel phones that had 12 push buttons on them, and they were stacked one on the other. So I had a total of 12 outside lines, some direct into brokerages, some were just outside lines. Every single phone on the floor, it was like Christmas in August because every phone was ringing, and it was a ring. It was like every phone around the room. It was unbelievable. And when you picked up the phone, the guy on the other end was somebody sitting on a trading desk, First Boston, Goldman Sachs, Bear Stearns, Merrill Lynch, wherever it was. And they come screaming through the phone, oh my God, did you see what happened? No, I didn't see what happened. What happened? What happened was the Fed came out with the surprise announcement. Paul Volcker steps up to the podium and announces that he's cutting interest rates by 10%. Now think about that for a minute. 10, not 1%, not a 0.5%, not a 1/4%, 10%. If rates are 21%, he's cutting them by 2 full percentage points. It was a massive move, massive. And so rates went from 21 to 19, but the message was, I'm slashing rates. We'll continue to slash rates because we're going to break the back of inflation. We're going to break the back of unemployment. We're going to break the back of economic malaise in this country. And so he did. And so that day is the day that's known as the birth of the greatest bull market this world and this country has ever seen. Now think about this. On Monday, we might have traded 30 million shares the day, for the whole day, 30 million shares. The market might have been up or down 50 cents. It was up 25 cents. It was up down 75 cents. That was a typical move in the Dow. The Dow was trading at 792. Today it closed at 26,659. And so on Tuesday, when this announcement came out, the place lit up like a Christmas tree, and the orders started to come in, and they weren't, buy 5,000 shares of Coke and buy 2,000 shares of IBM. It was buy 50,000 Coke, buy 100,000 GE, buy 25,000 IBM. Massive orders, right? Everyone just wanted in. We traded 138 million shares on Tuesday, which was 4 times what we did on Monday. And the market moved 4.5%. Now you say 4.5%. 4.5% was 35 points. 35 points is a blink of an eye today. But it was a percentage move. 4.5% today, the Dow closed up 140 points, say up 0.5%. 4.5% today would be 1,500 points on the Dow, right? So it closed up 35 points, up 4.5%. And we were there until 7 or 8 o'clock at night, because remember, the market traded, it was open outcry. It was manual face-to-face, broker to broker, pen to paper, bidding and offering and buying and writing reports and confirming reports. But it was the most unbelievable day, one of the most unbelievable days of my life. I have to tell you, like it was yesterday. I can feel it. I'm sweating already even telling you this story, because I can feel the moment. And so what happened was, now it turns into September, and I'm supposed to go back to college for my senior year. And the market was just nuts, right? It was crazy. And so the guy that I was working for begged me to stay, begged me to, he offered me a full-time job. Please stay, transfer your credits, go to NYU at night. But go to NYU at night after doing this job? There's no way I was going to NYU at night. I mean, just not because I didn't want to, but I wouldn't have been able to, right? And so in the last year, it would have taken me 3 years to finish. And so I said to him, I really want to go back and finish. I spent 3 years. I spent $30,000, blah, 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 blah. I want to go back and finish. Now, here's what's also important to understand. My generation, and I'm now 59 years old, but my generation was the first generation to really go to school. This guy that I was working for was a kid off the streets. He grew up in Queens. His father, his mother and father, they lived in a small row house in Queens. His father died when the kid was 18 years old. He couldn't go to college. He got a job at the New York Stock Exchange in the cage. It's where they used to exchange the stock certificates. And then he got picked up by one of the brokers that worked upstairs on the floor. Why? Because he had a good personality. He was a type A. He was excitable. He was energetic. They liked him. And they picked this kid up, and they taught the kid, and then the broker who picked him up and mentored him forced him. I use the word force because you're going to laugh when I tell you. Forced him to buy a seat on the New York Stock Exchange in 1974, maybe 75. Seats on the New York Stock Exchange were trading for $52,000. A New York City taxi medallion was more expensive than a seat on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange in 1974, because that was also a difficult time in this country economically, right? So he bought the seat. He was given, they loaned him the money. He bought the seat because, he was a young guy. He didn't have any money. So they loaned him the money. He bought the seat. That gentleman now own, it's like you buy the building, you have a business, you buy the building, right? He now owns that seat. He worked that seat, he built the business, he used that seat. The seat, like stocks, appreciates. It appreciates and declines in value based on the economic cycle that the U.S. economy is in. In 2005, when the New York Stock Exchange went public, because up till then it was a private institution and the seats represented the stock in the firm. In 2005, after we went through market modernization, and we'll get to that in a minute, but the place went public, anyone who owned a seat got a check for $6.8 million. So this guy paid $51,000 or $54,000 for a seat in 1975. He worked it. He built a business. It provided a life and a career for him and his family. And then in 2005, he took the seat and he turned it in, and they handed him stock and check worth $6.8 million. I think it was like 6.5 in stock and 350,000 in cash. I think that was it. It came out at $62 a share, traded up to $128 a share, and then it crashed when the market crashed, traded all the way down to $15 a share, and is now trading. It's gone through a couple of mergers, but now it's owned by ICE. And if you look at ICE, I think it's trading at, I don't know, $120 or $150 a share. But one way or the other, it was the true American story. I mean, that is really the true American story, and he's the perfect example. Anyway, so so he laughed at me and said, yeah, okay, go back to college. I went back to college my senior year, and I had the time of my life because I had this job 9 months out. He was paying me $36,000 a year at a time when kids couldn't get a job and guys were getting thrown out. And I went back in September of my senior year, clicking my heels like I won the lottery. So I had the greatest senior in my life. I never wrote a resume. I never went on an interview, which was probably a mistake. So don't take that. You should actually this is where you should disagree with me, because what I should have done was I should have written a resume. I should have gone on interviews, if for no other reason than the experience. But I didn't allow myself that experience because I was so enamored with the opportunity that I was blinded by everything else. So don't take that advice. Do yourself a favor, write your resumes, go on interviews. It's a good thing. So when I graduated, I went to Italy for a month. I came back in July of 1983. I moved to New York in early July. Now look, I'm an Italian kid from Boston, the middle of 5 kids, right? I'm the middle of 5 children. And if you know anything about Italian mothers, they want their kids around them, and they definitely want their sons next door. And you got to marry the girl next door. You got to buy a house next door. You got to live next door. And so when I moved to New York, my mother wasn't very happy. And I said, Ma, don't worry, it's just for a couple of years. I said, then I'll be back. Meanwhile, it's 40 years later, I was still there. So she's still not talking to me, but that's a whole nother conversation. But anyway, so I went there and I met my wife. And for the ladies in the room, you should also understand this, is my wife was also a kid from Brooklyn. She couldn't go to college. She got a job on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange as a squad, which was the kids that ran around. They were runners. They would run orders and order tickets back and forth from the booth to the broker in the crowd. And then she ended up getting picked up. She went to work there in 1976. She ended up getting picked up by a brokerage firm, and she was relegated to do what the role that women played at that point. And what they played was they were teletypists. They would take the reports, the executed orders that the men would trade. They'd give them to these women teletypists who would then translate them and type them into the system so that they went into the system. It's just the way it was. And then in the late 70s, women started, banging their head on the glass ceiling because the job the men were doing was so much more exciting. Oh my God, it was so much more exciting. And so these women started to bang their head in the ceiling and say, I want that job. And my wife, at the time she wasn't my wife, was one of them. And it was 1980, 79, 80. And so the firm that she was working for as a teletypist refused to train her. Women don't do that job. That was the answer she got. So she picked up and she quit her job. And then she went and she got another job. And here's the amazing thing about the floor. If you were somebody who had a good reputation, if you were somebody that people liked, if you were somebody that, that carried yourself properly, you could quit one job and have another job within minutes. That's the kind of place it was. It was unbelievable. So she quit. She had a job within minutes. And she went to work at Bear Stearns. And Bear Stearns said to her, we'll train you to do the man's job, but first you got to start on the teletype. So she said, okay, that's fine. I'll do that. So she did it. And 3 months later, she's still in the teletype. And so she said to the broker, when is it going to be my turn? When are you going to train me? And he said that they had a change of heart and they weren't going to train women to be phone clerks and sales traders. And she said, really? I quit. So she quit. And then she went to Donaldson, Lufkin, Genret, which no longer exists. It's part of First Boston now. And she knew a couple of the brokers there, and they actually, they liked her, they respected her. And Donaldson, Lufkin was one of those big investment banks that was just on the verge of recognizing that they had to start to open this window. They had to open this door. They had to have women. And so they hired her and they trained her to do the job of a sales trader, of an order clerk. And so my wife did that. And then she got hired in 1982 by Goldman Sachs, which was a really prestigious, massive move, because at that point, Goldman had no women on the floor. Their teletypists were located off the floor. The only people on the floor for Goldman were men. And so they hired her to run one of their whole booths in the blue room. There were 3 rooms. This room was called the blue room. And so she was the first woman at Goldman Sachs. And on top of that, my wife is Puerto Rican, so she's a minority on top of it. And so she was the first woman at Goldman Sachs to run a booth. So she had men working for her. And so she did that. And then in 1984, she had the opportunity to become a member of the New York Stock Exchange. And so not with Goldman Sachs, Goldman wasn't there yet, but she had, as an independent broker, offered her an opportunity. He was retiring. He wanted her to run her business. And so she thought about it. Now, we weren't married yet. We were just boyfriend and girlfriend. And I remember we went out to dinner, and I looked at her and I go, what are you doing? I mean, what are you even thinking about? How can you not take that job? This is a member of the New York Stock Exchange. Are you kidding me? So her fear was that if she took this job and she became a member of the New York Stock Exchange and I was still an order clerk, that somehow my ego would be bruised and somehow, I wouldn't be able to deal with it, and that I would break up with her. And I said to her, you know something? If you don't take this job, I'm breaking up with you. I said, because that's not the kind of woman I thought you were. That's not the kind of woman I want. I want someone who wants something. Go out and grab it, do it. And so she took the job and she became a member. When they were, at the time, she was probably the 12th or 13th female member and the first Hispanic female member of the New York Stock Exchange. So, and I'm very proud of that, as she is too. And so she got her seat in April of 84. I got my seat in August of 85. We got married in October of 85. She had her business. I had my business. She got pregnant in the summer of 86, and she left in January of 87 at that point then to be a mother and everything. That's what she wanted to do. I didn't force her. That's what she wanted to do. So, so that's her story. But when I went there and I full-time and I became the member and I was there, and then the market just rallied off the lows because interest rates kept going lower and lower and lower. And then we hit 1987. And for those of you who may or may not know what happened in 1987, there was this thing called Black Monday, and it was October 19, 1987, where the market crashed 22.5%. We lost 22.5% of its value in 6 hours. In one day, the market crashed. And there's a whole story behind that, because from 1982, when the bull market happened, up till 1987, the Dow went from 792 to 2,800. It was a massive move in the Dow, and it was a massive increase in prices of stocks. And it was such a vibrant economic time. But what happened was, a couple of these mathematicians, physicists, quant guys are all these, computer guys, because quantitative analytics and computerization was now, it was the hot new industry in college and high school and all that stuff. I missed it, right? I was in high school, I was on the front end. In college, it was just becoming something as I was graduating college. So I missed it in both places. But one way or the other, these guys decided that they were going to write this automated program that was going to control risk. And it was called portfolio insurance. And you can look it up and you can see it. Portfolio insurance is just what it's supposed to be. It's an insurance product. An insurance product protects you against a loss. Life insurance, disability insurance, health insurance. So it's portfolio insurance. And portfolio insurance was this automated program that took in all this data from around the world, and then it assessed risk parameters to what all this data meant. And then whoever bought this product would have access to this program, and they would feed their portfolio into the program. So the program knew the stocks that they owned, what the stocks had done, the moves that they had, what the market was doing, what the news was doing. And so this computer had been designed to take in all this data. And as we moved through the summer of 1987, the global markets had soared between 82 and 87, but the markets were not yet interconnected the way they are today. And that's part of that is key, right? So you need to understand that. Today they're so interconnected. Then less so. Because remember, there was no internet still, there was no LinkedIn, Facebook, none of that stuff. And so as we moved into the fall of 1987, the global market and the U.S. economy started to stutter a little bit. Macro data started to weaken. Stocks came under a little bit of pressure. Then they would rally again. Then they'd come under a little bit more pressure. The data would get a little bit weaker, whether it was U.S. data, whether it was Asian data, whether it was European data. One way or the other, the market started to come under pressure as we moved into October of 1987. And so on the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, it was like the 14th, 15th, and 16th of that October, every day the market sold off and closed on the lows, and it sold off again and closed on the lows. And by Friday, it sold off again on much bigger volume and closed on the lows, which is not a good sign going into the weekend. But what did I know? I was 26. I had a 6-month-old daughter. I had just bought a house. I had a white picket fence. I had a mortgage. I had a car. I had 2 cars. What the hell did I know? So I went home. And I said to my wife when I got home on the Friday night, I go, you know something? Something just doesn't feel right to me. I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it. It just feels heavy. What do I know? So it was October. We went pumpkin picking, and we, did the whole thing with my brand new daughter and carved the pumpkin and did all that stuff all weekend. It was all great. And then I went to bed on Sunday night. Think about this, because here's another important thing if you don't think about it. Sunday night in New York is Monday morning in Asia. 9 p.m. Sunday night in New York is 9 a.m. in China and in Asia. And actually Australia, it's 11 a.m. already. But what do I know? I go to bed. There's no CNBC or Bloomberg on the television. There's no internet I can check what the markets are doing. There's nothing. So I go to bed. But what had happened over the weekend was that this portfolio insurance product took in all this data that had happened all week long, stock prices, macro data, company data, and they fed it into the computer. And over the weekend, the computer spit out a message. The message was, if you had this product, you were a portfolio manager that owned this product, you got a message. I think it was actually an email. I think there were emails then. It was either that or it was a phone call. But one way that you got a message. And the message was that you needed to sell 2% of your portfolio to protect it. Now understand why. Because when you sell stocks, what happens? You sell stocks, but you get cash. So when you get cash, you put the cash over here on the side and you wait. And when the market stops being so volatile, you take that cash, you put it back to work. And so therefore, the way to protect the portfolio was to sell some of the portfolio. So the Asians were the first ones to get the message, right? Because it was Monday morning in Asia, Sunday night in New York. And so the Asians get the first message to sell 2% of their portfolio. Okay, think about it. If you're somebody managing $100 million, 2% is one number. If you're managing $1 billion, 2% is a different number. It's still 2%. It's just a bigger number. So everybody gets the same message. Everybody gets, no one got to buy 2%. No one got to have to buy. Everyone got to sell 2%. And so what do you think happened? So the markets in Asia came under pressure because everybody got a sell signal. Sell, 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 sell. And then as Asia started to come under pressure, these guys with the portfolio insurance said, oh my God, we got to rerun the program because now all this new data from Monday trading in Asia is different than the data we had on Friday. And so then they rerun the program, and the Europeans are the next market center to open because the sun moves around the world, right? Asia, Europe, US, back to Asia, Europe, US, it goes like that, right? So the Europeans now get a message to sell 3% because the devastation had taken place in Asia now caused a bigger sell order to Europeans. So the European markets start to come under pressure. Okay, so listen to this. European markets open at 5 o'clock in the morning. At 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm just getting out of bed. I'm taking a shower. I'm shaving. I'm getting dressed, and I'm going to the train station. I stop. I get my cup of coffee. I pick up my Wall Street Journal. It's Monday morning and I'm picking up the Wall Street Journal. What am I reading about? I'm reading about what happened when, not on Monday in Asia, I'm happening about what happened on Friday in Asia. Because Monday's already happened, but I'm reading a Wall Street Journal that was printed all on Sunday night. They don't know what the heck happened on Monday in Asia. So when I pick up the paper, I'm on the train, I'm drinking my coffee, I'm reading the newspaper. There's nothing really there that's mind-boggling. But I get to work and 7 o'clock, and all of a sudden the phone rings. And the phone never rang at 7 o'clock in the morning because nobody's there. The market's not open. The only time the phone rang at 7 o'clock in the morning if there was a disaster. Somebody died. In fact, there was a disaster because the buddy of mine called me up, and you can actually find this on the internet. Somebody made a cartoon of me telling this story on the internet. I'll have to give you the link for it. But if you Google my name and Google 1987 crash, it'll probably come up. But the guy was a buddy of mine from First Boston who was a trader. And he said to me, bro, do you have any idea what's going on? I go, no, what's going on? I'm sitting down there drinking my coffee. I'm organizing things. He goes, there's going to be a bloodbath today. A bloodbath? What's a bloodbath? Why is there going to be a bloodbath today? So he starts to tell me what happened in Asia. He starts to tell me what's happening in Europe, because Europe was coming unglued at the seams because, again, everybody got a sell order. And then, look, it's 5:50 already. I'm only in 1987. I feel bad. Can we go on for another hour? But one way or the other, there was going to be a bloodbath, and the bloodbath came in the United States on that Monday morning when the markets opened. We came under immediate pressure because those portfolio insurance guys reran the program with the data from Europe, and the message that the Americans got was we needed to sell 4% of our portfolios. And so you understand how the numbers got bigger and bigger and bigger, and so everybody got a sell order, and the markets absolutely cracked. And that just traded down and down and down. And there were no circuit breakers. Circuit breakers were born out of that event. At the time, there were no circuit breakers. So it traded down and down and down. Johnson & Johnson closed at $96 on Friday night. By Monday night, it lost 50% of its value and closed at $45. Think about it. Johnson & Johnson, they make baby powder and baby oil. Are you kidding me? But you know what? It's a big Americana name, right? It's a big mega U.S. company. It's got a big capitalization. If you need to raise money, you can easily sell Johnson & Johnson. You can't sell Bank of Hawaii. Who wants to buy Bank of Hawaii? It was an illiquid name. So if you need to raise cash and you're a portfolio manager, you sell what you can versus what you should. So GE, American Telephone, Johnson & Johnson, you name all the big names, those Coca-Cola, those are the ones to get slammed, because you could raise money. And so I remember that day like it was yesterday too. Wait, can you see me? I'm sweating, right? But anyway, so then we moved into I'll try to push ahead really quick. We moved into the 90s. After that event, they were born the circuit breakers, which now exist to control the market in the event of another sell-off like that. The circuit breakers only work on the downside. They don't work if the market goes up 20%. Nobody seems to care because everyone pats themselves on the back and said, "Look, what a great job I did." But then we would get into the 90s, and it was the tech revolution. That's when, all of a sudden technology became this thing, and it was changing industries around the world. It was starting to change the financial services industry. And it was starting to change how stocks settled, not how they traded yet, how they settled in the back office, because it was really an accounting function, so you could easily automate that function. And so that's what started to happen. But the other thing that started to happen, which you probably won't remember either, was this thing called Y2K, which was the turn of the century, right? And so the turn of the century presented this massive global problem because computers were expected to fail when the calendar went from December 31st, 1999 to January 1, 2000, because part of the problem was that dates were written in 2 decimal places. So it was 12/31/99, and then it was going to be 01/01/00, and the computers thought we were going backwards and not forwards, and GPS systems were supposed to fail, and planes were going to fall out of the sky, and utilities weren't going to produce energy, and water wasn't going to pump. It was like a disaster. And it wasn't a U.S. problem. It was a global problem. And so during the 90s, there was this massive, massive technology build around the world because anybody and everybody that had a computer needed to update it, needed to fix it, needed to buy a new one, needed to reprogram it. They needed to do everything. And so if you were a tech investor in the 90s, it was the most unbelievable place to be. And so the 90s were this, once again, the market recovered, and the 90s was this great decade for the stocks and for the market and for being there. And then we ran into the dot-com bubble, which then burst, because then all of a sudden the internet became this thing. Like people were fascinated with it. And companies were putting this thing called .com at the end of their name, and it was it was like gold. These stocks were on fire, and everybody and anybody was trading. They were all NASDAQ names because they didn't qualify to list on the New York, but they were all trading on NASDAQ. And everybody you talked to all of a sudden became a day trader, and they were buying these .com names, and they were making money until they weren't. Right? Because you may or may not realize what happened then was there was this bubble and then this burst of the .com, because it was built on, it was really like a house of cards at that time. And it imploded around the turn of the century. Then we went through the turn of the century. I know, I'll stop talking in 1 minute. We went through the turn of the century. We made it through the turn of the century, no problem. We started to modernize the markets, no problem. And then 9/11 happened. And what you have to understand about 9/11 is 9/11 forever changed the world. And we don't have time to talk about it now, but I'm happy to set up another one of these and tell you that story, because that's really an amazing part of the story, because what you have to understand is the impact that it had, not only on the nation, but the impact that it had in the financial markets. And I say that because I lived it. I was there. I had an office in the World Trade Center on the 55th floor of the second tower. That second plane went right through my office. And the fact that I'm even sitting here talking to you is really a miracle, because I shouldn't be here, but that's another story. And like I said, Aaron can set this up and we can do it again, because I'm happy to tell it, but I don't have time to tell it now. But I'm going to put these on now. And you guys can ask me questions, but I feel bad because we didn't even get into the 21st century, because today what you need to understand, I'll just say this real quick. The open outcry is gone. The 5,500 people are gone. Today, the New York Stock Exchange operates with less than 250 people. Less than 250 people. It's completely automated. The job I did no longer exists. The job that my wife did no longer exists. It's completely all automated. And now, as a result of 9/11, the New York Stock Exchange is but one of 11 exchanges that now exist in this country. It is the only physical exchange. The other 10 exchanges are virtual. They trade in the cloud. They don't exist anywhere. The servers that run them are located all over the country versus being located in one downtown New York City location, because all they'd have to do is blow up downtown New York City and they bring the system to its knees again. Now the servers are located in Colorado, California, Maine, and Florida. All these places, they'd have to blow up the country to bring the city to bring the system to its knees again. And if they do that, who really cares what Bank America is trading? Because we got much bigger problems. If they get rid of the New York Stock Exchange today, if they blew that up, is it a tragedy? Absolutely. But it will no longer bring the country to its knees the way it did in 2001. Anyway, I'm going to put these on. You guys can ask me. If no one asks me questions, then I'll just keep talking.
All right, I've put some chat in the chat saying, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. If you have one waiting, just raise your hand or do a thumbs up, and I'll call on you kind of in order. So any questions for Kenny?
Yeah, I'll go first. So right now is an interesting time because we have a presidential election next week. COVID cases are spiking. I was researching you, and I saw you on CNBC last week, and an article saying that you're predicting Biden to win. And so with that comes the massive stimulus package. And so I guess my question for you is, well, first of all, I kind of expect the same thing based on where we're at. But if you're an investor and you're looking to enter into the market, are you looking for an entry point where volatility subsides a bit before that package is released sometime in, I don't know, January or whatever? Or do you wait till it's released after?
I got you. I got you. So here's how I think. And I'm not expressing the fact that I think Biden's going to win does not express my political view. So I don't want to make this political. I'm just telling you what I think the market is telling you, what I also think my conversations are with people in the industry are telling me, what I sense in the market. I do think that Biden's going to win. I actually do think it's going to be a Democratic sweep and the GOP is going to get slaughtered. Now, I hope they don't get slaughtered, because that'll send a different message, not only to the market, but to the country. But I do think that Biden's going to win. So here, answer your question, volatility will continue through the year end, because what I expect is that I don't expect we're going to know on Wednesday, November 5th, whether or not we have a president, because at one point I thought we were going to know, and that there was going to be this massive sweep and landslide. But although I still think the Dems are going to win, I'm not sure it's going to be a landslide. So therefore I think it's going to be close. And so therefore I think it's going to be contested. And so the contested part of that is going to create more volatility in the market, because no matter which side thinks they won, the other side's going to argue against it, clearly. That'll create more uncertainty in the market. It'll raise volatility, and you'll see stocks react. Now, understand this, though. In the long term, none of this prices stocks. It creates chaos in the short term, doesn't create chaos in the long term, right? What the market can deal with news, if the news is good or bad, the market's okay with that, as long as it knows what the news is. Then the market can reprice. When the market is unsure of what's going to happen is when you get the spike in volatility. So to answer your question, if you're just new and you're starting a fund, you're starting to put money into an E-Trade account or a Robinhood account or whatever you're going to do, I'm assuming, let's talk about you're going to be an investor and not a day trader, because I'm assuming that's what you're asking me. Because a day trader is very different. A day trader doesn't care. You want the market to be uncertain. You want there to be lots of volatility if you're a day trader. You want to trade the stocks up and up all day. If you're an investor, you want relative peace and calm. Now, you're not going to always get relative peace and calm, but if you're a long-term investor and you're trying to build a portfolio, I would always say, and I say to everybody, if you're just starting out and where we are right now, and I expect more volatility, I'd tell you to be patient, because you're 20 years old, you got 50 years to go. Don't worry about it. You're not going to, if you miss it for 1 or 2%, what are you worried about? But I would say sit back. Patience is a virtue in this case, because I do expect that there's going to be more pressure to the downside and that there is going to be volatility. Now, once we know, if in fact, maybe it's the middle of December, and listen, that did happen with Bush Gore. Another thing you guys won't remember, there was a contested election. So it's not like this has never happened. Bush Gore in 2000 was a contested election, and we didn't find out until mid-December for sure, when the Supreme Court made the decision about who won that election. And so therefore the markets remained volatile for a couple of weeks. That was though a different volatility. This time it feels really ugly and divisive. And so I think the volatility this time could actually be worse. But for a long-term investor, it's actually good, right? Because if the market sells off, you're going to be able to buy Apple even cheaper than you can buy it today. Look, Apple's down 11% in 2 weeks. You know, it's trading at whatever it's trading, 107 today. 2 weeks ago, it was trading 130. Okay, great. You want to pay 130, you want to pay 107. And next week, you might buy it at 102. And so if you're a long-term investor in where we are right now, I'd be patient. Have your account, have your money ready, have your shopping list ready, and then start to pick away at it. You never want to go in and spend all your money in one fell swoop at all. You never want to do that. You want to feed it in over time. You need to establish a position. That you have to start somewhere. So you establish a position, and then you say, okay, I'm going to commit $1,000 to Apple. Okay, well, don't commit $1,000 to Apple all today. You might commit $300 today to Apple, and then you're going to wait a couple of weeks. You're going to see what happens in the market. You're going to see what happens in the economy. And then you're going to commit another $300 at some point down the road. And you're going to build this portfolio over time. So I would say to you, don't be in a rush right now, because I think you're going to get the opportunity to buy stocks cheaper. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I have a question. So it sounds like from your entire career, you've experienced a lot of ups and downs of the stock market. I was wondering, what is one thing that you know now? What is one thing that you know that you wish you knew going into your career?
That's actually a really good question. Is what would I say to the Kenny then from the Kenny now, right? That I know. And so there's a couple of things I would say. The first, and I already said at the very beginning, when I made that decision, when I had that job and I went back to college and I didn't write a resume, I didn't go on an interview, I didn't allow myself the exposure. So I would say, don't do that. Even if you have this, and I had the job of a lifetime, but I denied myself the opportunity, because who knows? I might have gone on an interview at Goldman Sachs and it also may have changed the course of my life, but I'll never know that because I never allowed myself that opportunity. So that's number one, is don't shut the door on opportunities that at least knock, because you never know where that knock's going to lead you. So that would be number one. Number two, the thing I would tell you that nobody ever told me was just like that gentleman before. You're 20 years old, or you're 21 years old, or you're 22 years old, and you're just starting, whether it's $25 a month or a week or every 2 weeks or $50 or $100, you should absolutely today, you should open up an account and you should put that $25 or $50 away, whether it's monthly, whether it's every 2 months, whatever it is, makes no difference. Put it away and forget you even have it. Build yourself a list of names, do your homework, start to build a portfolio when you're young, because you'll be very happy when you get older, because no one told me that. And in my case, I was 22 when I went to work there. I got married at 24. I had a kid at 25. I had another kid at 28. I bought a house. I was, my life just happened, and that's fine too. I don't regret any of it. But like I told my kids today, my kids are now 30 and 33, but I've been telling them for a while, just put it away. Just put it away and forget you have it. And that's exactly what I would tell you or anybody else. And I'm happy to help you do that.
Thank you.
Who's next? Oh, come on. There's got to be somebody else. You got 4 minutes.
I'll go next. Hi. What is the biggest lesson you'd say you learned during your 38 years working in the New York Stock Exchange?
Wow, that's also a very interesting question. I learned a lot, right? I mean, it's really life experience, right? Because I went right from college to work, and I did a lot, but I learned a lot. And I think one of the most important lessons I learned was, again, it'll go back to, if we're going to talk from a business perspective, it's going to go to the plan. It's going to go to having a plan. It's going to go staying focused on your plan, right? And things happen along the way that disrupt the plan. And it's okay to be disrupted. You hit a couple of bumps in the road, whatever, but it's about going back to the plan and keeping the long range plan. The other thing I would say that I learned that also, I don't know, I guess no one ever talked about it, but you should talk about it today, is make sure you're on the same page as your partner, whoever that partner is. Make sure that when you get more serious and you're walking down the aisle, that you're both on the same page. You both want the same thing financially, family, careers, whatever that is, because if you're working together as a team, it's easier to get to where you want to go. It's the people that don't have that conversation that end up not doing it the right way. And it's funny because my wife worked on the floor. She had a better job than I did at one point. She was making more money than me. She had a better job than me. But we talked about that, and we laid it out on paper. We kind of laid out where we wanted to be. Where did we see ourselves when we were 30, when we were 50, when we were 70? And we did that. We had that conversation when we were 25. And trust me, the conversation I had at 25 is not what I'm living today, because stuff happens, right? You have kids, people die, things happen that disrupt it. But the story I have today is the story I'm living. It may be different from the book I wrote when I was 25, yet the long-term goal and the long-term plan remains the focus. So that's what I would say.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Who's next?
I think we can take one more question to keep us on time and you ready for your 6:20.
Yeah, Australia business.
Yeah.
Because you see, I'll just tell you, it's 8 o'clock tomorrow morning in Australia right now. So I'm going to be talking into the future when I get on the phone with them. Go ahead.
Okay, Joe, you were going to ask your question.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I read somewhere that you were involved with Campfire Capital at some point, and I was wondering if you could explain what your role was there.
Yeah, so I'm a managing director. Campfire Capital is a boutique investment bank. It's actually owned by it's a veteran service organization. If you also look, you'll see I'm also very involved in veteran stuff as well. And some of that is a direct result of my own experience at 9/11. But Campfire Capital is a boutique investment bank. All the guys that are there as investment bankers are all former military guys. I'm not a military guy, but yet if you look at my profile and you search me, you'll see I'm very involved in veteran philanthropic organizations. One in particular called the Headstrong Project, and you can look it up right now and see it. But so that's my role there. So as an associate investment banker, I'll help them. I help raise money for them. They have deals. You know, they play in the tech space, they play in the healthcare space, they play in the energy space, and so they raise money for deals. They broker. You know, they sell. They help some of those businesses trade, right? When an owner wants to sell his business. So that's the role I play. So my role is really more of a face of, and I go out and I kind of bang the drums a little bit and stir up interest in the deals that they have.
Cool, thanks.
But here's the thing you guys should do. I don't know if Ray or Drew or Aaron told you this, but I also write a daily blog, and I'm on Twitter. If you follow me, it's at Kenny Bukhari, or on my LinkedIn. I post this blog every day. And it's a blog that you can read, and it's a blog that'll help you understand, because it's not written like a typical Wall Street piece of research. It is written like I'm just talking to you. And so it's easy to understand. I define it. I talk about it. As you read it day in a day, you're going to hear my voice. Now that you've heard me, you're going to hear my voice. You're going to hear me pounding on the table when I pound on the table, and you're going to hear me, you know, when I'm nervous about the market. You'll hear that too in the writing. And so I would suggest that, you know, it's free. You can get it on my Twitter. You can sign up for it too. It's fine. You'll get it by email. But I write it at, you know, 5 o'clock every morning, and I send it out by it goes out usually by about 7:45. But anyway, it would be something for you guys, men and women, to just to watch and to just look at. And in the end, I feed you because I cook as well. So in the end, at the end of every note, I give you a recipe. Today I gave you chicken saltimbocca, just so you know. So,
all right. Can I get all of you to unmute for just a second? Just unmute, and let's give Kenny a round of applause. Okay, so thank you, Kenny.
You're very welcome. You're
Thanks,
very
Kenny.
welcome. Listen, we should do this again, Aaron, because I didn't even get halfway through my story.
Yeah.
So if you want to do another one of these just to do it, just let me know, and I'm happy to kind of finish the story. I'll pick up from turn of the century, because, you know, the 9/11 piece of this story is actually so important to where we are today in terms of the U.S. capital markets and the way they function and why they function the way they function. So I'm happy to do it. Feel free to just organize it, and I'll join you again.
Thanks.
All right.
Awesome.
Thanks again, and good luck with your Australian interview, and we'll see you again soon, I'm sure.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kenny.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Kenny.
Okay, well, welcome students, alumni, friends, faculty. Thank you for joining us for the 14th Annual New York Trek Networking Social. I'm Erin Shields, Director, Alumni and Employer Engagement here at Gonzaga, and we're very happy to be able to offer the Trek this year, though virtually, to the 14 students who've been selected to participate in this valuable program. Earlier today, we had the opportunity to hear from 3 notable alumni leaders who made this Trek a reality 14 years ago and continue to make it a memorable and shaping experiences for students each year. We heard from Kevin Mcquilkin, trustee and managing director of M&A Wells Fargo Securities, Thatcher Thompson, trustee, partner Capital Group, and Rich Schinder, regent, founder, and managing partner of Theatine Partners. The 3 engaged in a candid conversation with students, sharing their career and financial industry wisdom, reflections, and projections. Following that panel discussion, we heard from Kenny Bukhari, Managing Partner, Case Capital Advisors and CNBC Market Analyst. Kenny presented on the New York Stock Exchange, which was a very fun and dynamic presentation for everyone. And now tonight we're gathered. We have alumni and friends representing a wide variety of industries, and they're here to really offer their support, recommendations, career insights with all of the students, as well as insights on what it's like to live and get established in New York City. So following some alumni introductions, we're going to break you all up into small groups. You'll be in a group of about 3 or 4, and we have some discussion topics that we'll offer, which I'll go over in a minute, but it's also a time just for the students to ask the alum there in the room with their questions and to allow for that face-to-face networking. So we'll all be able to unmute, be on video for that session. At this point, let's see, is Meg with us? Is Meg Niesliak
not with us? She has informed me that she is still waiting in line. She is exercising her civic duty and voting today.
Good. That's a good reason. So Nick Cunningham is our vice president of the New York chapter. He's also vice president portfolio strategy, Goldman Sachs. So I'd like Nick just to talk to you all about this wonderful resource of alums we have in New York for anyone who's interested or thinking about relocating to this area.
Yes, thank you, Erin. So to provide a little bit of introduction, I help run the alumni chapter out here in New York. I am a graduate of the class of 2013. So I have now been living in New York for roughly 7 years. I moved out to the city right after school. And I followed a pretty traditional path. I studied finance and economics at Gonzaga. I came out here, and I think a lot of students get the impression that New York City finance means investment banking. And I have not been a part of investment banking. Actually, I started out in what's called equity research, and now I work in asset management at Goldman Sachs. But something that really tied me into the Gonzaga alumni culture was really when I moved out here. I didn't honestly know a single person. And so the way that I wanted to get to know people, or at least put dip my toes in the water, was I started going to some of the Gonzaga alumni events. And I didn't know anyone at all, but I noticed that it was this very tight-knit culture, that even though these people, were from many different years at Gonzaga, didn't necessarily know each other, there was this sense of camaraderie that I found really compelling, which is not something that you always get in New York City, where you do have thousands and millions of people, but you don't necessarily have this tight-knit culture with them. So it was very special to find this group of people. And now today I can say that some of my closest friends in New York City are people that I met through the alumni group. And actually Meg, another graduate from my class, we actually didn't know each other at Gonzaga. We met each other through this alumni group. And so I think it's just a great example of how Gonzaga kind of continues to run through people long after school. And so I've seen through the alumni group out here and coming to the career trek every year, just the dedication of the alumni, and the faces and names change every year on the end of the students here, but it's good to see the same set of familiar alumni who are here year after year to support you guys. And so I would encourage you to not view this as being the end of the trek, but continuing to follow up with these different people and looking forward to them as resources to help you in the future. And so I am someone who actually came on the trek myself as a junior, I think entering my senior year. So I do have some experience in making this transition from going on this trek to making the move out to New York City. So I'd be happy to address that further. But thanks for joining us all today, and I look forward to chatting with you.
Thank you, Nick. It's so great. We have several New York Trek alums with us today, which is just fantastic to see you all doing well. And now I'm gonna go around. I'll call on the alums and friends with us to just briefly introduce themselves, a little bit about their background, job title, etc. And we will start with John Tierney, who's hosted us in person for several years as part of the Trek.
No, thanks, Erin, and thanks everyone for joining. We were chatting earlier before everyone else joined that it's been just kind of absolutely raining in New York City for the last couple days. So it would have been a really wet trek nonetheless, but I'm certain that everyone on this call was looking forward to trying to do it in person. Hopefully, you know, the world shapes up here shortly and things give opportunities for people to get out here and experience New York City. I've been in New York for since 2008. And right now I'm a managing director at Dial Capital Partners. It's an affiliate of Neuberger Berman. And prior to that, I was at the Blackstone Group. I've had the opportunity to host a number of the different kind of treks over the last couple of years. It's always something I really look forward to. So again, just really privileged to be on this call and kind of share any perspective I can help with everyone specific to starting your career in New York City, questions around the finance industry, whatever that might be. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, John. And now James. James is one of our New York Trek alums who has also hosted and presented as part of the program.
Yeah, great to have you guys all here. Again, kind of to echo John, wish we could host you guys in person, but I'm glad that we're able to do this via Zoom. Like Aaron mentioned, I was on the New York Trek. I actually went on the Trek as a senior, which is admittedly pretty late. So I think you guys are all much earlier into your Gonzaga careers, which is beneficial to you. I've been out in New York since the fall of 2016. I graduated from Gonzaga Finance concentration in 2016. Since being out here, I've worked at 2 different investment banks, a small boutique bank, then Jefferies Group. I've since moved over to Bowwave Capital Management, a private equity firm that invests in fintech and payment companies. And been here about going on 3 months now.
Great, thank you, James. And Thatcher. Thatcher, as I mentioned earlier, was part of our panel and one of the gentlemen responsible for making this trek possible.
Yeah, so I spent 16 years in New York, but no longer live there. I moved to San Francisco, but visit often. And I work at the Capital Group. So kind of my career post Gonzaga, I was a CPA for a year at Deloitte & Touche. Then I joined a small regional brokerage firm called Dame Bosworth, which was headquartered in Minneapolis, but had an office in Seattle that I worked out of. And then moved to New York, worked at Merrill Lynch, and in CIBC as a sell-side analyst, and then joined Capital about 15 years ago. And was kind of half in New York, half in San Francisco, but that's, and I focus on, I'm a small cap generalist, so all sorts of interesting companies. I listened to a couple of earnings calls after I got off the phone with you guys. One, a Seattle company called Trupanion, which does pet health insurance, which is kind of interesting. And another business called Floor & Decor, which is a really fast growing flooring retailer that's also interesting. I cover payments for Capital, so Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, Square, things like that. And I'm a portfolio manager as well in the Small Cap World Fund.
Thank you. Thanks for spending more time with us today, Thatcher. And Seth, good to see you.
See everyone. Thanks for having me this evening. My name is Seth Farashanis. I graduated from Gonzaga in 2004, and then I actually stayed the extra year to do my MBA. And I moved to New York not too long after that, so New York is definitely my home at this point. I've had a number of jobs, mostly in the media sector. So I worked for the Associated Press for a number of years, a couple of kind of content websites. And for the past 4 years, I've been working for the American Kennel Club. Currently, I'm our Director of Strategic Planning, so I oversee our business intelligence group, as well as kind of our new revenue group and our company roadmap. And since March, I'm also the managing director of, we had dog daycares in the city, and I'm helping to kind of manage those on a day-to-day basis. So,
thank you, Seth. And David Whitson, another Trek alum who has also hosted us at CAMAC for several years.
Yeah, good to see everybody. As Aaron mentioned, my name is David Woodson. I've been in New York about 2.5 years now, almost. Came out in 2018, and as you mentioned, I work at a firm called CAMAC Retirement Group. We do a lot of financial consulting, and we actually work with Gonzaga. So Gonzaga through and through. I finished my bachelor's in finance in 2016 and master's in 2018. So I've been out there ever since.
Thank you, David. Emily, thank you for making it tonight.
course, yeah. Thanks, Erin. So I'm Emily Hatchie, and I graduated Gonzaga back in '07, and obviously work at Deloitte, as I just said. So I've been there about 11 years in total. So I was there for about 8 years, and then left and went to a couple of different industry roles, Rag & Bone and PepsiCo. And now I've been back for about 2 years doing various things, our accounting and reporting advisory group, and most recently in our Office of the CEO, which has been very different because we do a lot of event planning and this type of Zoom coordination. So I'm learning everything there is to know about Zoom. So it's very interesting. And I moved out to New York about 10 years ago, and I'm currently quarantining in Philadelphia to get a little more space, working from home in my 1-bedroom apartment with my husband. It was a little rough, but we will be back. We miss New York City so much, and we'll definitely be back in the city, and hopefully we can all catch up in person at some point.
Thanks, Emily. And Kevin Mcquilkin. Kevin is one of the people responsible for making this trek happen, and such a great experience. Kevin was also one of our panelists. Thanks for making the time for us tonight.
You bet. It is cocktail hour in New York, and if you were all here, we would have a toast tonight. So I'm ready. I don't know about you all, but I'm ready. But I just want to echo what Nick said. And there is some familiar faces. There's a lot of them. I'm still curious about James's hairstyle there. That's fascinating.
I was curious about your beard, so back at you.
I was thinking I was jealous, but I decided I'm not. That's okay.
You two always have a great exchange.
But there's a lot of familiar faces of the alumni, and that is part of the experience. It is a community, and that's the message to the Trekkies, if that's what you want to be. Is remember this. You know, Zags give back, and Zags help Zags. You've all heard that, but it's for real, and take advantage of it. That's the message.
Thank you. Thank you. And Jordan, welcome.
Hello, hello. Yeah, nice to meet everybody. I see a couple faces I know. Emily, I think John, we bumped into each other. We have similar friends in Lewis Kleist. So real quick introduction, Jordan Voidy, I'm in the class of 2005. I'm currently the financial services sales leader for PwC, which is an audit and consulting firm based in New York. And it's interesting, I'm a poli-sci student, so I didn't study finance, I didn't go to school marketing. I basically moved to DC after college to try to use my degree right on Capitol Hill. Who would imagine who'd want to do that today, right? And so randomly landed on marketing for a marketing job at PwC, and have spent 14 years there. So 6 years in DC, 4 years in Boston, and now 4 in New York. So I'm just trying to hit every East Coast city I can before it's all said and done. But you know, the one thing I would stress is the importance of networking, right? So, you know, I see some faces of folks I know or I haven't talked to in a little bit here. And as you think about going to a new city, whether it's New York, whether it's Seattle, whether it's Boston or wherever, never expect that the person you meet introduce you to someone you may know next, right? Every opportunity to meet somebody is an opportunity that could could open its doors going forward too. And so, you know, any advice or any way I can help, I'm happy to. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you, Jordan. Okay, so at this point, just a little preparation. You will be in small groups. You'll be in 3 separate groups. For each group, you'll be in there for about 10 minutes. And of course, once you're in there, we ask the students to introduce themselves. And then I am going to pull up some discussion topics. So these are breakout room discussion items, and I'll put these in the chat. What are the benefits of living in New York City? What do you like most, like least? What surprised you about starting your career? And your best piece of career advice for student participants. Of course, students, if you have other specific questions for the alums, this is the time to do that. And we welcome that. So I think, Lucas, we are ready, and it will give you a warning when the groups are about to close. Yep, Lucas is making that magic happen, and we'll see you all back soon.